Well, can I reassure the Honourable Lady that raising this issue does not test my patience? And she is absolutely right. I reject and disagree with those in Israel that say there can be no two-state solution, because if there's no two-state solution, then there is either one state or no state at all, Mr. Speaker. So I recognise why this is a pressing issue, and she can raise it, but as I've said, we will do it at the appropriate moment, hopefully working with other partners as a road to that two states that we desire.
Debbie Abrahams.
Two, please, Mr. Speaker.
In my second week in the role, I travelled to Israel and to the West Bank and called an immediate ceasefire, something none of my predecessors had done. And in my meetings with both leaders, I called for an immediate ceasefire and made the urgent case, as has been described, for a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome my right honourable friend and all the team to their place. And as well, I'd like to thank him for calling for the ceasefire when he did visit Israel. That has had a profound impact in my constituency. Does he agree, though, that a permanent ceasefire in Gaza is not only essential for the future of people in Gaza, but would also help to cool tensions in the Middle East, particularly given the attack on the Golan Heights and the tensions that are escalating between Hezbollah, Israel, and even Houthis as well?
Well, my Honourable Fred is right. The death and destruction in Gaza is intolerable. The war needs to end now. And it is also the case that, given the escalation of tensions in the region, if that Biden plan is adopted by both sides, we would see that escalation come down. And so for life in Gaza, but also across the region, it is important that that plan is adopted now.
Gon McKay.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 and 22 together. The people of Gaza face a humanitarian catastrophe. Humanitarian aid is a moral necessity. Almost 90% of the population in Gaza have been displaced, and the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification's recent famine risk assessment found there was a risk of famine across the whole of Gaza.
Okay.
Can I thank the Minister for her answer? Last week I met with the Palestinian ambassador to discuss the heartbreaking crisis in Gaza. Since April, the volume of aid cargo entering the Gaza Strip has decreased by around 50% at the same time as hospitals remain damaged or in many cases destroyed. That's why I welcome the Foreign Secretary's commitment to resume UNRWA funding and his demands for a ceasefire in the region. So can I ask the Minister, having resumed that funding, what steps the Government are taking to allow this vital aid into Gaza and help those so desperately in need?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue, and we are deeply concerned at a number of the developments that he mentions. The UK is providing and will continue to provide significant humanitarian support to Gaza. However, we are also clear Israel must meet its commitment to flood Gaza with aid. It is vital.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I very much welcome the Foreign Secretary's decisions on the International Criminal Court and on UNRWA funding. This morning I met with Oxfam, and they told myself and other members of this House that they predict that in this summer, when Parliament's in recess, up to 7,000 people in Gaza will be killed or injured, up to a third of them children. Given this, can the Minister outline what urgent steps the Government will take this summer in order to end this horror, including ending UK arms sales to Israel?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, too many people have died in Gaza and too little aid is getting in. We are clear that Israel must take concrete steps to protect civilians and aid workers in accordance with international humanitarian law. This includes deconfliction between military and humanitarian operations and supporting the minimum operating requirements of the UN agencies, as well as, of course, the other matters that my honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, laid out, including the need for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
Deirdre Costello.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week I met with some of my constituents in Ealing Southall who live in the Hanwell Broadway area, and they told me about Hanwell Friends of Sabastia, a friendship and support network between our corner of West London and a village in the north of the West Bank. So my constituents have heard firsthand how Palestinians are suffering across the territory. Could I ask what difference this decision to restart funding for UNRWA, the UN aid agency, will make to the lives of ordinary Palestinians, and what discussions she has had with UNRWA's Commissioner General to maximise that impact on the Palestinian people?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this matter, because we are clear that UNRWA is the only humanitarian organisation that's able to operate at the scale required in Gaza. Now, the Foreign Secretary, as members will be aware, confirmed to the House on the 19th of July that the UK would resume funding to UNRWA. On the same day, I met with the UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini to understand more from him about the situation on the ground, but also reforms that UNRWA itself is undertaking. We also talked about this government's release of £21 million in new funds to UNRWA to support its life-saving work in Gaza and the provision of basic services in the region.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents in Aylesbury are appalled by the death and destruction in Gaza. They know, like we do, that only an immediate permanent ceasefire in exchange for the return of the hostages will put an end to this unacceptable and unbearable suffering. In the meantime, the Minister referenced the Israeli government's promise to flood Gaza with aid. The reality is that they are putting in place repeated and deadly obstructions. What conversations has the government had with Israel to ensure that the Israelis end this denial of life-saving assistance?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for a question. I know she has a personal interest in this area and indeed experience from humanitarian work before she came in to this place. Now, when the Foreign Secretary was in Israel, he pressed Prime Minister Netanyahu to open all border crossings, including Rafah, to facilitate a significant increase in aid and to allow the safe, effective distribution of aid within Gaza. We will continue to press urgently for this.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. Despite designating al-Mawasi as a humanitarian safe zone, there have been multiple Israeli airstrikes which have killed dozens of civilians and wounded many more, and resulted in the bombing of a compound belonging to the charities Medical Aid for Palestine and International Rescue Committee. So can I ask the Minister what discussions she has had with her Israeli counterpart about stopping any further attacks on al-Mawasi, and where displaced Gazans have been ordered to go by the Israeli Defence Force for their own safety?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm aware this issue is of personal concern to my honourable friend, that he's visited the region many times, including when he was opposition spokesperson for the region. He asked specifically about the issue of civilians within this conflict. We are aware that around 90% of the population within Gaza have now been displaced, some of them more than one time. We are very, very clear. We need to have a situation where civilians are protected, where aid workers are also treated in accordance with international humanitarian law. We need to ensure that there is deconfliction, and as I stated before, those are matters that we have been pressing as the new government. Thank you.
Ruth Cabray.
Mr Speaker, the World Health Organization has warned that the lack of sanitation and clean water due to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza means there's a real risk of polio spreading undetected among the people of Gaza. Will the UK government consider supporting a mass vaccination programme in Gaza?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this matter, and I discussed it, as well as the Foreign Secretary, directly with Dr Tedros, the leader of the World Health Organization, yesterday. She is right about that severe concern around polio, also around the vaccination scheme that the World Health Organization is working on. But I would also point to the fact that when populations are not receiving the food and nutrition that they require, nor clean water, the potential for infectious disease obviously increases. The UK has provided significant support around food and nutrition, other forms of shelter as well, and essential materials. We will continue to do that, and indeed to work with the World Health Organization on these important matters. Thank you.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the eyes of the world are rightly on the shocking situation, dystopian situation in Gaza, we should not forget the humanitarian situation in the West Bank, where a largely defenceless population is being ever more persecuted, exposed to violence, seeing their homes and land stolen. Can we please have a comprehensive set of sanctions against violent settlers, the organisations that support them in their activities, and those that are complicit at a state level in what they're doing?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member for raising this issue, and the health and well-being of those in the West Bank was again one of those issues that I discussed with General Lazzarini, obviously from UNRWA, because we are concerned about that situation. We, as one would expect, are keeping all sanctions regimes under review, including this one, and we remain concerned about the situation both for the population but also in terms of the longer term issues around a two-state solution that were referred to previously.
Al Pinkerton.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I thank the Secretary. The Government have announced a strategic defence review, but the challenges that the UK faces in the mid-21st century are military-related, they are development-related, and they are diplomatic-related. And I would just like assurance that the Foreign Office is going to have a distinct role to play in the strategic defence review, particularly given the light of the conversation that we've just had that shows the complexities of the UK's global posture in the 21st century. Thank you.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for his point. Of course, all of these issues interrelate strongly. We are absolutely determined that we will be working with colleagues in defence, as well as indeed across the whole of government, so that we ensure that we are putting our country's interests first, and above all, protecting our security, the first responsibility of any government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent months, Hamas have targeted Israel's Kerem Shalom goods crossing with rockets and mortars to prolong the misery of their own people, and are also estimated to have spent $150 million constructing their terror networks, misappropriating aid. So does the Minister accept that Hamas will always prioritise conflict with Israel over the well-being of their own citizens in Gaza, and that more steps need to be taken to stop the misappropriation of aid by Hamas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for his question. Of course, aid materials must always be provided directly to those who are in need, particularly in a situation of humanitarian catastrophe, which is the case currently within Gaza. It is incredibly important that food and nutrition, clean water, other forms of sanitation, medicines and shelter are provided directly to those in need. They must not be misappropriated. That is absolutely fundamental. Of course, these are issues that we've discussed, for example, with UNRWA when we met with them, that we have discussed with other aid agencies as well that are involved in the region. Thank you.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, key to ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, of course, is to stop selling weapons to those who have shown they're prepared to use them indiscriminately against civilians. It's been suggested that the government will continue to sell defensive weapons, but given that Israel defines its entire campaign as defensive, how do they propose to tell us at the end of the review on international humanitarian law just how many of the 40,000 civilians who have been killed were killed with defensive weapons as opposed to offensive weapons? And on what legal basis would such a determination be made?
The Honourable Member, I believe, will be well aware that this is a legal process. It is one which has to be complied with. This government is absolutely clear that we must act with integrity and ensuring that we are following all of those legal procedures, as indeed the Foreign Secretary set out last week in this House, and as he's just set out this morning. Thank you.
Richard Ford.
Mr. Speaker, as Shadow Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Tottenham urged David Cameron to publish the FCDO's formal legal advice on whether Israel is breaching international humanitarian law in Gaza. As Foreign Secretary, does the new ministerial team still think there is a compelling case to publish the government's legal advice, and will the government be publishing it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for his question. The Foreign Secretary has been crystal clear on this, that he will be as transparent as he possibly can. He will ensure that Parliament is fully updated on these matters.
Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for that response. Minister, if we want to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, then it's quite clear what we have to do. What the free world has to do, that's get rid of Hamas, the murderers and the terrorists that they are. They hide amongst the schools, they hide in the hospitals, they hide amongst the civilians. They are the people that are bringing the death to the Palestine. If the Palestinians, and we want to give them the humanitarian aid that we should, then get rid of Hamas.
Here. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member, and of course this government recognises that Hamas has used civilians as human shields. We are deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation. I have set out a few moments ago our response to that. We need to ensure that civilians are protected, and we will continue to press for that as a matter of absolute urgency.
Phil Brickle.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and this government is determined to increase the pressure on Russia and continue to support Ukraine. We will keep our Russia sanctions regime under close review and will go further to reduce Russia's capacity to wage war. The government has already taken early further action, including the EPC, in sanctioning an additional 11 ships as part of efforts to disrupt and deter Russia's shadow fleet. And I, in my early meetings, have raised our Russia sanctions consistently with partners and will continue to work with our closest allies in Europe and the United States.
Brickle.
The UK has sanctioned 2,000 individuals and entities since Russia's unlawful full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yet, since 2022, there's just been one instance of UK law enforcement securing sanctioned funds. What discussions is the Minister having with counterparts across government to ensure that those who evade sanctions are held to account and that money held unlawfully is secured for the public purse?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question? It's a very important question. He's absolutely right to raise it, Mr Speaker. This government will not hesitate to take firm action to close loopholes and to strengthen enforcement of sanctions. He'll understand that I won't comment on future designations or enforcement actions, but as I said, we've already taken some early steps on the shadow fleet. But he is right, there is much more to do, whether to improve compliance or to target those who enable sanctioned individuals to evade our sanctions, and I will of course keep the House closely updated.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his early statement calling on the Russian government to release British citizen Vladimir Kara-Murza, Will he look at what further sanctions might be used to put pressure on the Russian government to release him and other political prisoners like the American journalist Evan Gershkovich?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for this very, very important question. He's absolutely right to raise it. We call for the release of all those detained in Russia on political grounds, including those imprisoned for their opposition to Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. And we've met with many of the families of those concerned and will continue to take this very, very seriously.
Shadow Minister Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by congratulating the Minister on his appointment? I know how hard he worked on this brief in opposition. And he will know that the longer Russian sanctions are in place, the more creative Russia becomes at circumventing them. What steps do he and the Foreign Secretary plan to take to end the UK's indirect import of Russian crude oil via the 3 refineries at Jamnagar, Vadinar and New Mangalore? And did he discuss this issue, or did the Foreign Secretary discuss this issue when he travelled to see our Commonwealth friends in India last week?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and it's a pleasure to see her in her position and to have worked with her many times on these issues in the past, across these benches, but also in other formats, Mr. Speaker. As I already outlined, and indeed as the Foreign Secretary outlined, we took robust action against Russia's shadow fleet alongside allies of the European political community. We will continue to explore further options to strengthen our sanctions, including in the energy sector, and indeed the Foreign Secretary did raise this at his meetings in Mangalore.
Gregor Ponton.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
I met my Indian counterpart, Dr. Jaisankar, in Delhi on the 24th of July. We discussed how to unlock the potential of the UK-India relationship for economic growth and to develop a stronger, deeper partnership to reinvigorate that relationship. I was very pleased to launch the Tech and Security Initiative, which brings together businesses across our two countries working in these areas.
Boynton.
Great. I'd like to thank the Right Honourable friend for his response. I recently met with a number of members of the growing Indian population in my constituency of Livingston, and they were very clear with me that if we get our India-UK relations right over the coming 4 or 5 years, that will be a huge benefit to both countries. So I'd like to ask the Foreign Secretary, does he agree with me that the signing of the Technology and Security Initiative within just a month of office shows that we're working internationally to drive our economy and secure our country?
Well, very grateful to my honourable friend. He'll be pleased that the Trade Secretary announced the government's intention to continue trade talks with India just yesterday. I'm sure there's more we can do to reduce barriers between our two countries.
Blackman.
Thank you, Speaker. When the Right Honourable Gentleman visited India, clearly the last government had got a long way down a free trade agreement, but it was stalled because of the Indian general election and then our general election. There are some sticking points, and I wonder if he could update the House on his discussions on removing those sticking points so we can actually unlock the free trade deal that both sides of this House want to see.
Well, the honourable gentleman has great experience in these matters. I disagree with him slightly because he'll remember that the last government set a timetable and said we would have a trade agreement by Diwali. And I'm afraid the question is which one, because successive Diwalis passed and we didn't get one. But I was very pleased that the Trade Secretary set out that we are going to continue negotiations. And of course these issues came up with my counterpart in Delhi.
We come to Shadows Minister Alicia Kearns, and well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary rightly visited India to discuss a trade agreement between our countries. His party regularly called for human rights to be part of that UK-India trade deal. So can he update the House on whether he secured said agreement during his visit? Now, on human rights, we on these benches welcome the Foreign Secretary raising with his counterparts the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, a British national who the UN has determined to be arbitrarily detained, and there were reports that he was subject to torture. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman confirm today before the House that he still believes, as he did a month ago, that Jagtar is being arbitrarily detained? And will he today publicly call for Jagtar's release, just as he urged from this dispatch box repeatedly the last Foreign Secretary? Will he meet with Jagtar's family, as Lord Cameron did? And finally, having adopted the Foreign Affairs Committee's recommendation of a special envoy for Britain's wrongly detained abroad, when will he be announcing that somebody has been appointed?
What can I say to the Right Honourable Lady who has raised these issues over many years, that this is a very serious case, and I remain absolutely committed to pushing for a faster progress and to resolve it. I did, of course, raise the issue with the Minister for External Affairs in India last week. We continue to raise our concerns, particularly about allegations of torture and the right to a fair trial, and of course I will meet with the family over the coming weeks.
Tom Gordon.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Iran's continued repression of women and girls, ethnic and religious minorities, and human rights defenders is unacceptable. We will continue to work with international partners to hold the regime to account, including at the UN Third Committee later this year.
Dan Gordon.
Mr. Speaker, the Iranian authorities have been systematically targeting BBC Persian staff and their families in an attempt to intimidate them into stopping their work as journalists. Freedom of the press is a fundamental right for people all over the world. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Foreign Secretary and his colleagues commit to working across government with the Culture Secretary to revisit the previous cuts to BBC Persia and look to increase funding for vital work the service does?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very important question. Iran clearly remains an extremely hostile environment for journalists who face harassment, arbitrary detention and long prison sentences. We'll be raising this issue with the new Iranian government when it's formed. The honourable member will know that they are having their inauguration today, so there are no ministers yet for me or the rest of the Foreign Office team to talk to. On the question of the BBC World Service, the Foreign Office currently provides a quarter of their budget, and we will no doubt be looking at this as part of the wider budget review.
And Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Minister to his place. As we were tragically reminded again this weekend, the IRGC is a destructive, malign and terrorist force that is operating through proxies in the Middle East, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Will the Minister please update the House on the work that is ongoing to proscribe the IRGC, something which sadly the opposition failed to do when they were in government? And will he please reassure the House that the UK continues to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel against their continued aggression?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for the question. This government recognises the threats that IRGC poses. We will take the necessary measures to counter it at home and abroad. We'll keep the list of proscribed terrorist organisations under careful review, but it would not be appropriate to comment on whether or not an organisation is under consideration at this time. Iran continues to destabilise the Middle East through its support to its proxies and partners, and we will work with international partners to challenge this destabilising activity.
Alistair Strathern.
Number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Well, one of my predecessors, Ernest Bevin, was instrumental in setting up NATO in the first place, and that's why our commitment to NATO is unshakable. The Washington summit demonstrated that NATO is bigger, stronger and more united than ever, and the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary continue to engage with allies, and we're very pleased to make our commitment to 2.5% of GDP for defence spending.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of my proudest moments in my admittedly reasonably short time as an MP so far have been joining my communities back in Shefford to commemorate the incredible role played not just by British but Allied troops based in our local bases in supporting our way of life through the wars. It's in that spirit that I welcome and celebrate Britain's renewed commitment to NATO on the Labour. But with the previous government having failed to deliver that crucial 2.5% spending commitment, will the Secretary of State commit to working with ministers as soon as the Defence Review is completed to ensure that we've got a timeline to delivering on that as soon as financially possible?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to pay tribute to the work of our armed services and all of our veterans, and I thank him for doing that in the House today. And we have undertaken a strategic defence review and also to ensure that we set out a timetable to get to that 2.5% of GDP out of the appropriate fiscal event in the coming months.
Julian Lewis.
Does the Foreign Secretary share my concern that the dominant strand in the US Republican Party is at the moment falling into the trap of renewed isolationism? And what can we do to try and impress on our American allies that if they turn away from NATO, they will only postpone a conflict that could otherwise be avoided completely?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I know that the right honourable gentleman speaks from immense experience on these matters. He will recognise that there are a range of opinions on these issues within both political parties in the United States. I was very pleased to see that Donald Trump spoke recently to Zelensky, and that the supplemental of £61 billion worth of aid to Ukraine was found recently.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that Ukraine's joining of NATO is absolutely vital to not only Ukraine's security, but also to all European countries' security?
Well, very grateful to my honourable friend for the question. It was absolutely right that at NATO we were able to set out that irreversible pathway to membership for Ukraine, and that NATO was able to come together and speak with one voice.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to have served on NATO operations in both Bosnia and Kosovo, and the 2.5% commitment will strengthen our ties within NATO. Can the Foreign Secretary commit to a timeline at the earliest opportunity to ensure we don't have to cancel any defence projects and ensure that we have the 2.5% of GDP on defence spending ASAP?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman and the honourable gentleman that spoke before him for his service on these matters. Can I just gently remind him that the last government to get to 2.5% of spending on defence was a Labour government? We intend to get back there, and those plans will be announced at a fiscal event in the future.
Tracy Gilbert.
Question number 12, Mr. Speaker.
As soon as I came into office, I commissioned new advice on Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law in the context of war in Gaza. We are obliged to look at that advice under criterion 2C for items exported. This is an ongoing process. I pledge to update the House as soon as I can on this very, very serious matter.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the change in approach from the government on this devastating conflict in Gaza, and that the review was ordered soon after the Foreign Secretary's appointment. If the review were to conclude that Israel was breaching international law, can the Foreign Secretary confirm that all actions, including halting arms sales, would be considered as part of the government's proportional response?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that the criteria under 2C of our strategic exporting licensing is a clear risk of breach of international humanitarian law. Careful assessments have to be made. There is then a legal process to enable me to meet that conclusion. And of course, with all sobriety and integrity, I intend to do that and update the House as soon as I can.
Absolute calm.
13, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 13 and 16 together. We've been clear that the government must uphold both our domestic and international legal obligations. The UK respects the independence of the ICJ. We received the advisory opinion in the question on the 19th of July and issued a statement which made clear that we will consider the advisory opinion carefully before responding. My colleagues on the front bench have already made clear our opposition to violence from settlers on the West Bank, and I'm happy to expand on that point if the questions would like.
Come.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary for showing bold leadership and unequivocal support for international law by dropping the previous government's opposition to the arrest warrant against Netanyahu. The ICJ's historic advisory opinion earlier this month made clear that Israel's occupation and annexation of Palestinian territories are unlawful, something many of us have been campaigning against. What steps is the Foreign Secretary taking to ensure Israel ends its unlawful occupation, particularly the recent expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and the annexation of East Jerusalem?
Thank you to my honourable friend for his question. I know he cares about these issues deeply. The Foreign Secretary visited the region within a week of taking office, and he has raised these precise issues with the Israeli authorities. I reiterate that we are strongly opposed to the expansion of illegal settlements and rising settler violence. More land has been declared by Israel in the West Bank as state lands this year than in any time since the Oslo Accords. The British government already has sanctions against 8 people and 2 groups in relation to settlers in the West Bank, and we will be looking at all options for tougher action on issues facing the West Bank.
Corbyn.
Can the Minister be clear? The judgment or the opinion given by the ICJ is quite clearly that the occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem is illegal. The settlement policy is illegal. Does the government accept that view? In accepting that view, what actions are they going to take to ensure that appropriate sanctions are made against Israel, including ending arms supplies to them, to ensure that that judgment is carried out and the people of Palestine will be able to live in peace and not under occupation?
I thank the Right Honourable Member for his question. This is an extremely complex finding of 90 pages issued after considerable deliberations by the ICJ, with a variety of views from the judges. As we said at the time, it will take us some time to respond to the full judgment, and we'll update this House when we're in a position to do so. Sanctions will remain under review, as I've discussed in the previous answer.
Number
14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Bangladesh is an important Commonwealth friend. However, we do remain deeply concerned about the recent events, and I thank the many members across this House who have raised it with the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. I spoke to the Bangladesh High Commissioner on the 19th and 23rd of July, and then on the 22nd of July, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, called for an end to the violence and for democratic reforms and the rule of law to be protected.
Senator Begum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the high death toll among student protesters, international human rights bodies are reporting further crackdowns on dissent, from mass arrests and enforced disappearances to torture and unlawful killings. Does the Minister agree with me that Bangladeshi people must have the right to exercise their fundamental human rights, including the right to protest, and will she join with me in expressing solidarity with Bangladeshi people in Bangladesh but also around the world facing repression?
She is an excellent champion for her constituents, and the UK and international partners continue to push for progress towards accountability and justice, including through an independent, impartial and transparent investigation into alleged human rights violations.
Dame Caroline Dinich.
Number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Give me. Oh dear. I was pleased that at the NATO conference we were able to come together as all nations and reaffirm our commitment to Ukraine, and that we took great heart from Zelensky speaking to the cabinet for the first time and being united that we continue to stand with the people of Ukraine.
Dame Caroline Dinich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course I welcome his commitment and the government's commitment to supporting Ukraine, and the provision of military aid and humanitarian aid is important, but sadly it won't be enough to secure long-term peace. So will he reassure me that if and when Ukraine seek peace talks, the UK will stand by them and support them absolutely in their efforts to bring this wasteful and terrible war to a conclusion?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that I welcome the Ukrainians' desire to have peace summits and to see so many nations come together to discuss the issues that are pertinent to getting that peace. She knows that the best way to achieve peace is for Russia to leave, and that we continue to stand with Ukraine. And just as we committed in opposition for this to be a cross-party issue, I'm very grateful that the honourable gentlemen in the front bench are ensuring that this remains a bipartisan issue here in the UK Parliament.
Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the Secretary of State and all ministers to the front bench, and I look forward to working with them. Can the Secretary of State reassure the House that he is working flat out, as was the last government, to make sure that the roughly £2 billion of funds generated from the sale of Chelsea Football Club gets distributed urgently and reaches those in desperate need of humanitarian assistance due to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine? And does the Minister agree that Chelsea FC is effectively now one of the largest charitable organisations in the country, and the sooner the funds are mobilised, the better?
It's an ongoing and complex issue. We endeavour to do the best that we can at pace, unpicking much that happened previously under the previous government.
We now come to topicals. Lloyd Hatton.
Topical 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is reconnecting Britain with the world in European capitals, at NATO and in Lebanon. I've been resetting relations with Europe and reinforcing support for Ukraine. I've also deepened partnerships with the Global South to tackle the climate crisis and unlock economic growth. And I'm taking a balanced approach on the Middle East, calling for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages and more aid into Gaza.
Lloyd Hatton.
A builder living on Portland, a B&B owner in Weymouth, or a shopkeeper on Swanage High Street all pay their fair share of tax. And yet some individuals take advantage of offshore tax havens, such as the BVI, to avoid paying their fair share. My constituents play by the rules. We ought to know a bit more about those who choose not to. So can the Secretary of State set out what steps his department is taking to throw open the books in British tax havens and implement public registers of beneficial ownership.
I raised this issue in opposition. I think it was the last speech I gave before the election. It's an issue that I intend to take up with full vigour. We were concerned that parts of the last government were turning a blind eye to these issues, and I hope to come forward with further proposals in the coming weeks.
We come to Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitch.
And he'll get full support from this side of the House in imposing open registers of beneficial ownership on the overseas territories. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary to pay special attention to Sudan, which is suffering the largest displacement crisis in the world? There is clear evidence of ethnic cleansing once again in Darfur, and the human misery, which I saw on the border with Chad earlier this year, is amongst the most harrowing I've ever seen.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising the issue of Sudan. I was able to raise this issue with G7 foreign ministers in my first days in office, and I continue in discussion with the United States, who, as you know, have summoned a gathering in Switzerland to try and achieve that peace.
Drew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both main parties committed in their manifestos to restore the 0.7% international development target. And as you will have seen, last year we reached nearly 0.6%. So will you discuss with the Treasury returning to 0.7, not in one bite, but over the next 2 years? This would secure best value for money for British taxpayers and also help those most in need.
Well, I paid tribute to the Honourable Gentleman earlier, but this is one area that was left in a mess because, frankly, 3.4 billion being spent on refugees in hotels is a lion's share of that amount. It's a lot for myself and my honourable friend, the Overseas Development Secretary, to deal with, but we will do all we can to get back to that 0.7% as soon as possible.
Imran Hussain.
Mr. Speaker, next week marks 5 years since the illegal revocation of Article 370 and 35A, taking away what little autonomy the Kashmiris had and paving the way for further persecution of the Kashmiris by the Indian Armed Forces. So will the Minister make clear she's committed to upholding international law and confirm that the UK will uphold UN Resolution 47 that demands the birthright of the Kashmiris to a free and fair plebiscite?
Thank the Honourable Member for Bradford for his passionate defence of human rights in Kashmir, and he, of course, understands the UK government position that all countries should respect sovereignty, human rights, the rule of law, and we push all parties to work towards upholding United Nations resolutions.
Lib Dem Democrats spokesperson Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend we saw an escalation across the UN blue line when Hezbollah and Israel were exchanging rocket fire. 12 Druze children tragically lost their lives. One child dying in war is too many, no matter what nationality they may be. But this region is a tinderbox. What is the Foreign Secretary doing to calm the area now that we have seen an escalation? Because surely that would be a disaster for the region.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right. The situation on the de facto border between Lebanon and Israel is very concerning. We urge all parties to act with caution. The UK condemns the strike in the Golan Heights that has tragically claimed the lives of 12 people. Hezbollah must cease their attacks and their destabilising activity. I was pleased to speak to the Prime Minister yesterday, and there will be more that I will say on Lebanon in the coming hours.
Ian Byrne.
On the 19th of July, the Foreign Secretary stated that 500,000 people in Gaza are at phase 5 of acute food insecurity, the classification definition that indicates starvation and famine. UNICEF had already reported 29 children have died from malnutrition. How does the government plan to change this reality as Palestinians face the harrowing reality of death by starvation because of a political choice?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. We discussed it obviously previously within this session, we're deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation within Gaza. We have obviously reflected that in our policy response, but also in our humanitarian response as well. That's included, for example, the statement that was made by the Foreign Secretary on his visit to the region, where he committed £5.5 million to UK Med. They're providing a field hospital on the ground, which is desperately needed. We've also ensured that there will be continued provision of the items of medicine and food and nutrition that's required, and play our part in that. Thank you.
In room.
Mr. Speaker, the united support for Ukraine is not shared in the United States, with worrying comments by the Republican vice presidential candidate. So, Mr. Speaker, I know the Foreign Secretary knows Mr. Vance. Can he tell the House what assurances he has from him regarding financial and military support for Ukraine should Trump win?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that the US has committed over £135 billion in support for Ukraine, including the £61 billion supplemental for Ukraine, and we thank them for that. I was very pleased to meet with JD Vance at the Munich conference and then subsequently in Washington, DC, and I continue to have a good conversation with him about these very important issues.
Ola Barton.
Speaker, the destruction and loss of life in Bangladesh is of grave concern to me and a great number of my constituents. I welcome the Minister's conversations that she has already had with Bangladeshi counterparts in urging for calm. Can the Minister advise what measures are being taken to support British nationals in Bangladesh, and will she join me in thanking the Bangladeshi community in my constituency of Liverpool Wavertree, who contributes so much to our city?
I thank my honourable friend for being so active on this issue, including at the parliamentary engagement on Bangladesh last week. The UK is deeply concerned by the violence by state and state-sponsored actors, and we have updated the travel advice, and all of the information is available on the FCDO website. And we will be very open to taking personal emails from her or any other members who have constituents who have got concerns either in Bangladesh or in the UK.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In quick succession, this new government has renewed unconditional funding for UNRWA despite the Hamas links. It's also endorsed the ICC's very controversial case. Following Hezbollah's attacks at the weekend, will the government reflect on the step-by-step abandonment of one of our closest allies in the Middle East and the potential impact that this could have on continuing rather than curtailing conflict and delaying the peace settlement that we all want to see in the Middle East?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, there is absolutely no abandonment of our close ties and our relationship with Israel, and it was hugely important for me to speak to both the Prime Minister and the President to reiterate that, of course. But it was also right in reflecting on the work of Madame Colonna and her report, and I urge him to read the report and read the recommendations, that like all of the rest of our international allies, that we do come forward with the funding. We did that with an extra 21 million. And can I remind him that $1 million of that is to ensure that those recommendations are implemented to ensure the neutrality of UNRWA.
Mr. Speaker, what steps is the government taking to ensure that Israel complies with its international legal obligations following the recent rulings by the International Court of Justice?
I know my honourable friend has taken up these issues time and time again from the dispatch box. Let me make clear, the expansion that we have seen this year is entirely unacceptable. It's more than the last 20 years that we've seen combined. We are keeping these issues under review, and of course I raised that with Prime Minister Netanyahu when I saw him in Israel.
Manuela Portugala.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the government commit to do whatever it can to urgently secure an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, get the hostages home, and to re-establish as soon as possible a dedicated peace process to set us on the path to a two-state solution raised by many of my honourable friends today, including the member for Oxford West and Abington?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady speaks for the whole House in the way that she has put her comments, and I give her that undertaking.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell me what steps are being taken to support peace and human rights in Colombia,
And as the penholder for the UN Security Council, can the Minister say more about what steps the government can take or any new initiatives to support the full implementation of the 2016 Colombian Peace Agreement?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I know that she has visited the region and has a keen interest in it. Colombia, of course, is one of the 32 countries currently designated by the FCDO as a human rights priority country. We work closely with the government and communities, including Indigenous communities, to work on violence against women and girls, and the UK has committed £80 million towards peace, stability and human rights, working together with civil society across the piece.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, this summer marks the 50th anniversary of the illegal occupation and invasion by Turkey of the northern part of the island of Cyprus. The Foreign Secretary tell the House what steps, what initiatives his government is going to take to seek to resolve that frozen conflict for which the British government does have a historic responsibility as a guarantor power.
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his very important question, and well aware of his interest on this issue over many years. We remain committed as a government to a bizonal, bicommunal federation on the basis of political equality, adherence to United Nations Security Council resolutions, and we'll continue to engage with the United Nations envoy and the UN process on this important matter.
David Taylor.
Can I ask the Minister what assessment they've made of the potential implications of asylum accommodation policy of using the overseas development budget to help fund asylum accommodation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is committed to restoring overseas development assistance, as we mentioned before, to 0.7% of GNI as soon as fiscal circumstances allow, and overall to restoring our development reputation and reconnecting our country to countries in the global south. Now, the delivery of aid by this government is made more challenging by what took place previously, the uncontrolled expansion of so-called in-donor refugee costs. In 2023, the UK spent £4.3 billion of overseas development assistance on in-donor refugee costs. That's 27.9% of UK ODA. We are determined to ensure that we do not have the kind of unplanned reductions we saw before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps will the British government be taking following the highly disputed election result in Venezuela of election of President Maduro in working with our American colleagues over the disputed land in Guyana to prevent any incursion there?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising these issues. It's of huge concern, this disputed election that has taken place in the last few days, and I issued a statement yesterday. And of course, there is ongoing discussions with our American friends and indeed with the state of Guyana, given the threats that we've seen from Maduro in the past. I'm very grateful for the question.
Ben Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that it's just been revealed that the UK has fallen out of the top 10 manufacturers globally, does my right honourable friend agree that strengthening our country's trading relationship with the European Union for goods as well as for services needs to be an essential part of achieving the government's ambitions for growing the economy?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that our biggest trading relationship is with the European Union, and he will know that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson got the paper-thin deal that he did. We haven't yet got a new commission in place. We've are absolutely committed to a new veterinary deal and to dealing with the issues of qualifications particularly, but we will take forward discussions with the European Union in good spirit in the coming months as soon as they're in place.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ethiopia is on the cusp of recognising the Republic of Somaliland, and I would ask the Minister to look at where British policy is to make sure it reflects the new reality, and I'd ask if she would maybe have time to meet with me to discuss how we can strengthen and deepen our relationship between Britain and the Republic of Somaliland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK has encouraged dialogue between Ethiopia and Somalia when it comes to this issue of the Ethiopia-Somaliland Memorandum of Understanding. We've also expressed our full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia. Of course, I would be happy to meet with him on any issue, including this one. Thank you.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you. I welcome Honourable Friend and his team to their places. I've discussed with many of them the chronic human rights situation in West Papua over many years. In 2019, President Widodo invited the High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit West Papua. That visit has not yet taken place. What steps is the government taking to ensure that visit takes place, both the Indonesian government and with the United Nations?
I thank my honourable friend for his inter-parliamentary work on this important question. The UK strongly supports the efforts of the authorities and civil society to address the legitimate concerns of the people of Papua, as he's highlighted many times in this House. We continue to monitor the situation in Papua, including the ongoing issue of internal civil displacement caused by clashes between separatists and Indonesian security forces in Papua. The UK remains supportive of a visit by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Mr. Speaker, has the Foreign Secretary had an opportunity to meet with his counterpart in the Irish Republic, given the ministerial statements there in recent months regarding the thousands of people that they believe to be there illegally, that they say have come from the United Kingdom, and what can be done to try and resolve that matter in a way that will satisfy both nations?
Well, I was very pleased, alongside the Prime Minister, to meet with the Irish Taoiseach and to discuss these and other issues.
You and I are both old enough to remember Tiananmen Square. The use of lethal force on student protesters in Bangladesh has rightly been condemned by our government. Can I urge that the Bangladeshi investigation, that they put pressure on that it has an international element, because a country that can just turn off all communications with the outside world and controls all institutions right down to their stormtrooper-like police shouldn't just be allowed to mark its own homework.
My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has been very clear that what has happened in the last couple of weeks in Bangladesh is not acceptable, and we've raised that on a number of occasions, including the nature of the judicial review which is currently being undertaken by the government of Bangladesh.
Dance.
A 25-year-old constituent of mine went missing on the evening of Saturday the 13th of July in Sardinia. The Italian authorities called off the search on Friday. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Foreign Secretary meet with me to urge the Italian authorities to help find my constituent?
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for representing the concerns of his constituents' family. I recognise this is a very, very distressing time for them. He will know that consular officials are providing support to the family and have remained in regular contact with the authorities in Italy. The Ambassador has raised this case with the Italian authorities. They've ended the active search, but the investigation is ongoing, and I'd be very happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
Can I thank the Secretary? Can I thank the Foreign Secretary and his team for the £500,000 committed to the Caribbean after the devastation on Grenada and Carriacou from Hurricane Beryl? But can I press him and the team with the fact that the Caribbean is at the sharp end of the climate crisis? So can he tell the House what plans he has to advocate at COP29 for a replacement to the £100 billion climate finance deal?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for taking up these issues from the backbenches. He will know that I was dealing with these issues on day one in office. Very sadly, this is the beginning of hurricane season across the region. So I keep in close touch with my Caribbean colleagues and expect to have further conversations later today. And of course, we will be taking up these issues as we head to COP.
Shawkat Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the House will agree with me that the situation in Gaza, and particularly for children, is absolutely horrific, with reports estimating that up to 50,000 children are requiring health-related treatment, and that's not even including conflict-related injuries. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that, along with international partners, we must secure a mechanism that allows these children to be treated here in the UK, especially as many hospital facilities have been erased in Gaza?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issue of medical treatment within Gaza is one that this government takes very seriously, including that, of course, for children. We have reflected that in our operations since coming in to office, particularly around supporting UK Med, which operates a field hospital that the member may be aware of. As I mentioned before, the Foreign Secretary announced £5.5 million going towards its operations. Now, that includes covering support for trauma, other forms of public health as well within Gaza. And we will, of course, keep this under review. There's extreme need. Thank you.
Egan.
All of us here want to see an end to the conflict in Gaza and Israel, and that means getting to a lasting peace as soon as possible. Growing in concern that we're seeing rising hostilities on the north of Israel with Hezbollah, with a deadly increase attacks targeted against civilians. Hezbollah, of course, an Iranian-funded terror group which has entrenched itself in southern Lebanon. Can the Foreign Secretary give us reassurance that Britain will play a full part in working with Israel and other allies to counter this threat?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable friend for the question. Further escalation is in nobody's interests, and can I reassure him, we understand who sits behind Hezbollah, and that is Iran. And they have been engaged in a lot of activity to drive escalation forward in the region. So, of course, I want to give him that reassurance.
Final question, Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 111 hostages are unaccounted for in Gaza. Some are foreign nationals, but most are Israeli citizens. Recently, bodies were recovered from under Yunis Khan, the city, demonstrating that Hamas have complete contempt for humanitarian areas. What action is the Foreign Secretary taking to secure the release of the hostages? And will he guarantee that Hamas will play no further part in the governance of a state of Palestine?
I can say to the honourable gentleman, it was very important for me to meet with hostage families when I was in Israel. I've spoken to hostage families since returning back to the country, and of course we are giving all assistance we can to the Israeli authorities to ensure that those hostages get out. And I really want him to understand that we have this as a #1 concern. Those hostages need to be returned.
That completes questions. Right, I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act of 1967, that the King has signified his Royal Assent to the following Act: Supply and Appropriation Main Estimate Act 2024. We now come to the urgent question. Kevin Hollingray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State to make a statement on financial redress for postmasters and outstanding issues relating to the Post Office Horizon scandal?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As honourable members will know, convictions across the UK have now been quashed through recent legislation, and those affected are now able to apply for financial redress under the Horizon Convictions Redress Scheme. The scheme will be wholly delivered by the Department, not the Post Office. All other forms of redress, including those pursued under the Group Litigation Order, will be delivered by the existing schemes. Mr. Speaker, since taking office, this government has continued to work closely with both the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive to identify those who have had their convictions overturned. Letters have started to be issued to those eligible, which will confirm that their conviction has been quashed and provide further information on how to access financial redress. But I would encourage those who believe they are eligible not to wait for a letter. Please do come forward now and register for the Horizon Conviction Redress Scheme. We have put guidance on gov.uk to help people know where they stand, whether their conviction has been overturned, and if eligible, how to apply for redress through the registration and application process. Victims will be able to choose from two options. Firstly, they can either accept a fixed settlement of £600,000, or secondly, they can choose a full claim assessment if they believe their losses exceed £600,000 and wish to have their application fully examined by the government. No matter what route they choose to take, once an applicant's eligibility is confirmed, they will be paid a preliminary payment of £200,000. We're making sure that they can access historical data from both the Post Office and HMRC to support their decision and the application. We also recognise that with the best will and support in the world, in a few cases, some information may not be retrievable. But I can assure honourable members that even in those cases, we will do all we can so that a fair offer is made to sub-postmasters who have suffered this terrible injustice. This House was united in the last Parliament in its wish to see justice for sub-postmasters, and in this Parliament we do intend to deliver on that.
Shadow Minister Kevin Holland-Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it is disappointing that I've again had to ask an urgent question to get the government to come to the dispatch box. It's also disappointing that neither the Secretary of State nor the Postal Affairs Minister has responded to either of those urgent questions. This is a very clearly important matter and one deserving of full scrutiny by this House. And despite earlier promises by him, only 12 days ago, to give the House a significant update, only a written statement was available. One of the final acts of the last government was to pass legislation which, for the first time in history, overturned hundreds of convictions and set in train the process to provide redress to the victims. We made a clear commitment that these victims would be able to apply for redress before the summer recess. This commitment has not been honoured. Although claimants can now register for redress, to do so they need a reference number that is only available to those individuals written to by the Ministry of Justice, who have today confirmed that only 10 postmasters of the 700 have received such a letter. So can I ask the Minister, when will the other 690 postmasters be written to? Assuming claimants apply for the most rapid form of redress, a fixed sum award, when will the first £600,000 payment be made? The Secretary of State will acknowledge that we had conversations regarding course of appeal convictions and those refused leave to appeal, which were not quashed by the legislation. What steps is he taking to ensure these cases are given assistance to overturn their convictions? The last government also announced that we would top up claimants in the Horizon shortfall scheme to a minimum payment of £75,000. How many of the thousands of claimants in this scheme have been written to that effect? And finally, where is the Secretary of State, or where is the member for Harrow West, who I understand has been appointed Post Office Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we promised to update Parliament before the summer recess. We've done that by way of a written ministerial statement, and I note that the Shadow Secretary of State himself, when he was the Minister, came and answered on most occasions for the government. We certainly didn't take that as indication that the government was taking this matter any less seriously than they should, and that's not the case now either. And I understand the frustration that the Shadow Secretary of State has about the number of letters that have gone out, but there have been difficulties in corroborating some of that data. I understand when the Shadow Secretary of State made that promise as a minister, he did so in good faith, but it has turned out that there have been additional physical checks that have been required. We have had to access court documents, sometimes stretching back decades, which have meant that there have been delays, but the Ministry of Justice have actually put more resource into that to ensure that that carries on at pace. As is noted, the website is now up and running. Applicants can register on that now. I'm pleased to report, as of this morning, already 89 people have done so, and we hope that once verification checks have been completed, that payments can be processed within 10 working days. In respect to the Court of Appeal question, we understand that that was discussed at length during the passage of the Act. It is a matter that is deserving of further consideration, and I understand that the the Minister for Postal Services has indeed had conversations in regard to what we can do in respect to that.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the answer provided by my honourable friend? He will remember that when the Select Committee reported just 4 or 5 months ago, we noted that 80% of the budget for redress had not been paid out. And we suggested to the now Shadow Secretary of State a number of measures to put into the bill to speed up the process. Those amendments were rejected. So Can the Minister now assure us that he does have a grip on this and we will now begin to see cheques in the post much faster?
Can I just say, we do speak through the chair, not to the Minister, and as an established member of this House, I'm sure he wouldn't want to start on the wrong foot with me. Come on, Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the honourable member makes a very important point. We do want payments to be processed as quickly as possible. Data is updated monthly on the government website. We can see that in terms of the group litigation order, 210 offers have now been made under the HSS scheme of 2,730 claimants. Altogether, 2,417 offers have been accepted, and 110 convictions on the OCS scheme. Initial payments have now been made to 103 of those people.
We come to the Lib Democrats. Spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's been said many times across this House, but it bears repeating. This was an appalling miscarriage of justice. The shocking dishonesty of Post Office officials found its match only in the bravery of the sub-postmasters who stood up to them. The Liberal Democrats welcomed the legislation in the previous Parliament to finally deliver justice by quashing their convictions, and we likewise welcome measures to ensure that those affected get the compensation they deserve. However, what we've seen with previous compensation and redress schemes for the victims of this scandal was a pattern of delay, complication and inefficiency. Neither the Post Office nor the Department for Business and Trade have earned the necessary trust of sub-postmasters to administer these schemes. And it was with that in mind that in 2022, the Business and Trade Committee recommended that an independent intermediary body should be set up. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that it is now time to appoint that independent body to ensure that these schemes get delivered fairly, effectively and without delay?
I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for their contributions. We are concerned that matters are taking too long. We have been working with lawyers who've signed up to a framework for representing claimants, and we're looking at ways that we can speed the process up. There are issues in terms of actually collating enough expert evidence to support the claims, but we are looking at ways how that can be actually accelerated. In terms of the independent process, we are looking at an independent mediation step after the initial decisions and offers are made, and ultimately an independent appeal decision will be considered as well.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There's a whole number of individuals out there who, because they weren't directly employed by the Post Office, they've been convicted, they've repaid a huge amounts of money, 10, 20, 30,000 pounds back to the Post Office, but because of the circumstances they find themselves in, hence not employed by the Post Office, but perhaps by the sub-postmaster, cannot get any redress whatsoever. These are victims of the Horizon scandal equally as much as anyone else. Can the Minister tell me what advice he can give me to the people in my constituency of Blythe and Ashton who find themselves in these circumstances?
I'll thank my honourable friend for the question. I think there are some specific circumstances there that I would welcome his further information on. If he can contact the department and the relevant minister, we'll look through those circumstances and see if there is anything we can do, because we really do not want anyone to be out of pocket as a result of this scandal.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Communities across the country were impacted by the Horizon scandal, and one of those was Wheaton Aston. And not only did Wheaton Aston lose a much-loved postmaster, they actually also lost their post office as well. Would the Minister look at the specific case of Wheaton Aston, not just in terms of that postmaster getting the compensation, but also take up the issue with the post office to make sure a post office is returned to the village?
Thank the right honourable member for his question. I'll certainly relay that back to the department. We'll look in some detail on that. It is important that communities do have a post office that they can access. They are a vital part of our infrastructure in this country. They are a vital lifeline for many individuals, and we want to make sure that every community is served as much as possible.
Thank
you, Mr Speaker. I'd just like to take a moment to pay tribute to my predecessor for the work that Marion Fellows did in this issue throughout her time in this House. I'm delighted to hear from the Minister that there's been conversations with the Scottish Government regarding this issue and looking for justice and redress for sub-postmasters. Can I ask the Minister how confident he is that there will be no further obstacles put in the way of justice and redress in Scotland by the Scottish Government following those conversations?
I thank the my honourable friend for her question and would join her in paying tribute to her predecessor, who was tenacious in her pursuit of this matter. We have had a number of conversations with the Scottish Government, and we don't want to see any difference between the way this scheme is administered in any part of the country, and we're confident that that will be the case.
Dame Caroline Downey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a national scandal, and it's almost impossible to quantify the lack of trust, the loss of trust that has resulted both with the government but also with the Post Office over this. I wonder if the Minister could just set out a little bit more what they intend to do to ensure that the information and the support to make these applications to the redress scheme for every single postmaster that had been affected, every single one that had a conviction quashed, is going to be taking place.
Thank the honourable member for a question. It's a very important one. Disclosure packs are being prepared for every claimant, which will contain what we believe will be all the information they need to assess whether they wish to accept the fixed sum or proceed for a more detailed assessment of the claim. It will include details of their contracts and remuneration with the Post Office, details of whether they were eligible for the Royal Mayor Share Plan, and indeed any other information that the Department can obtain which is requested. We want to work at pace with individuals to make sure they have all the information they need to make an informed decision on this.
It's Osborne.
Speaker, the Minister will be aware that I've long campaigned on this issue. He might not yet be aware of a letter that I sent to his department highlighting issues with the current compensation schemes, as well as calling attention to issues with the original 555 sub-postmasters, of which my constituent Chris Head belongs. Chris was one of the thousands of Horizon scandal people impacted by the scandal, and he himself has still only been offered 17% of his verified claim. So will the Minister agree to meet with me and Chris to discuss these issues?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I am indeed aware of the letter and indeed all the work that she has done over a number of years in support of her constituents and indeed the wider sub-postmaster community. I'm sure that the relevant minister will agree to meet her and her constituent, and I'll make sure that request is passed on to him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member for Ynysmôn, I represent Lorraine Williams and the formidable Noel Thomas, who spent his 60th birthday in jail for a crime that he never took place. It is clear that sub-postmasters continue to be treated appallingly by the UK Government in the wake of the Horizon scandal, made to feel guilty for the cost of compensation for the public purse. Can the Secretary of State give me confidence to know that the new government will compensate for the real human cost of the suffering caused by this awful scandal?
Thank the honourable member for a question. We do not want sub-postmasters to feel guilty for claiming what is rightfully theirs. That what this place has decided is their entitlement. We've made measures to ensure that they won't have to foot any legal bills for taking advice in respect of their applications, and we want to make sure that every potential head of loss is covered and adequately compensated for. So we want to make this as easy and as swift as possible for those affected.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear from the Minister that they are going to expedite this national scandal and sort out payment to those people who have been extremely badly treated by what is a state-owned entity. My question is, are you going to do anything about those people who arguably knew that the Fujitsu software called Horizon was deficient and yet still brought legal cases against sub-postmasters, many of whom went to prison? Personally, I think there must be some redress, and those people going right the way back who were responsible for bringing cases against innocent people in the knowledge that the software was deficient, they must suffer some form of penalty.
The honourable member makes an important point which has been raised on a number of occasions previously. We believe that the correct approach to this is for the inquiry to assess those individuals' particular culpability, and then we will take forward their recommendations, because I think it's important that we see that individuals do take some responsibility and accountability for their actions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Horizon IT scandal is without doubt one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our history, and whilst we cannot change what has happened, we must establish what went wrong. So can the Minister assure the House that he will carefully consider the findings of the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry? And does he agree with the Shadow Secretary of State's position that there should be prosecutions for those that are deemed responsible?
Again, we are taking a very close interest, as the Honourable Member would expect, in the evidence that is coming forward in the inquiry. Much of it is shocking. It's very concerning, the amount of obfuscation and, shall we say, misinformation that's been put out by a number of individuals. We think it's right to wait to see what the Chair of the inquiry recommends in terms of future action, but we're certainly committed to looking very closely and making sure that individuals do take responsibility for their actions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents who was affected by the Horizon scandal was about to end more than 20 years of service with the Post Office with a comfortable package when she was persuaded to take on a Post Office for those 2 months. She did and got caught up in the Horizon scandal. She then had months of trauma of trying to prove her innocence, arguing with the Post Office, and was sacked, lost the package and lost a lot of expense. I spoke to the previous Minister about it, and she has applied for compensation, but she's now being told that she's not entitled because she didn't have a contract, which she says she did have. So will the Minister meet me to discuss how we can possibly protect people and ensure that they get the compensation they're entitled to, and that we don't have this continual excuse finding for not paying people who deserve compensation?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for raising that question. Where there are evidential difficulties, we are looking at other ways that we can make sure that those who should be eligible are entitled to the claim, and I'm happy to have further conversations with her in respect of that.
Jim Chapman. I can thank the Minister very much for the answers to the questions that have been posed. And I make representations for the 26 postmasters from Northern Ireland who have been fighting for years, and indeed for more years as well, to clear their name. Whilst it is fantastic that movement has been made to undo the wrongs of this scandal, and for that I thank the Minister and the Government very much, what steps have been taken to ensure that compensation is issued to all postmasters across the UK in a timely manner to avoid more delays and miscarriage of justice, including those 26 from Northern Ireland? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank the Honourable Member for his question. We are working closely with the Northern Ireland Executive to make sure that all the information required is verified and corroborated, so that those individuals in Northern Ireland who have been caught up in this scandal receive that letter as soon as possible.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll let the front benches change over. I now call the Deputy Prime Minister to make a statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin my statement, I know the whole House will join me in sending our deepest condolences and strength in the hours ahead to those affected by yesterday's shocking incident in Southport. And as a mother and grandmother, I can't even begin to imagine the depth of pain and suffering of those involved. And I'd like to echo the words of the Honourable Member for Southport in thanking the police and the emergency services for their swift response. And our thoughts and prayers are with those who have already sadly lost loved ones and are now fighting for their lives as well. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I've come to the House to make a statement about this government's plan to get Britain building. Delivering economic growth is our #1 mission. It's how we'll raise living standards for everyone, everywhere. The only way we can fix our public services. So today I am setting out a radical plan to not only get the homes we desperately need, but also drive the growth, create jobs and breathe life back into towns and cities. We are ambitious, and what I say won't be without controversy, but this is urgent. Because this Labour government is not afraid to take on the tough choices needed to deliver for our country. Mr. Speaker, we're facing the most acute housing crisis in living memory. 150,000 children in temporary accommodation, nearly 1.3 million households on social housing waiting lists. Under 30s less than half as likely to own their own home compared to in the 1990s. Rents are up 8.6% in the last year. Total homelessness at record levels. There are simply not enough homes. Those on the benches opposite knew this, but what did they do for 14 years? As my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, said yesterday, they ducked the difficult decisions. They put party before country. They pulled the wool over people's eyes by crowing about getting 1 million new homes in this last Parliament. But they failed to get anywhere near their target of 300,000 homes a year. And in a bid to appease their anti-housing backbenchers, they made housing targets only advisable. They knew that this would tank housing supply, but they still did it. And as I stand here today, I can now reveal the result, that the number of new homes is now likely to drop below 200,000 this year. Unforgivable. This legacy makes our job all the harder, but it also makes it so much more urgent. So today, I'll explain how Labour will deliver the change needed to turbocharge growth and build more homes. And I'll start with housing targets. Decisions about what to build should reflect local views, but that should be about how to deliver new homes, not whether to. Whilst the previous government watered down housing targets, caving into their anti-growth backbenchers, this Labour government is taking the tough choices, putting people and country first. For the first time, we'll make local housing targets mandatory, requiring local authorities to use the same method to work out how many homes to build. But, Mr. Speaker, that alone is insufficient to meet our ambition. So we're also changing the standard method used to calculate housing need, so it better reflects the urgency of supply for local areas. Rather than relying on outdated data, this new method will require local authorities to plan for homes proportionate to the size of existing communities. And it will incorporate an uplift where house prices are most out of step with local incomes. The collective total of these local targets will therefore rise from some 300,000 a year to just over 370,000 a year. Now, some will find this uncomfortable, and others will try and poke holes. So I'll tackle the four arguments head on. First, that we're demanding too much from some places. To this I say, we have a housing crisis and a mandate for real change, and we all must play our part. Second, that some areas might appear to get a surprising target. Well, Mr. Speaker, no method is perfect, and the old one produced all sorts of odd outcomes. Crucially, ours offers extra stability for local authorities. Third, that we are lowering our ambition for London. I'm clear we're doing no such thing. That London had a nominal target of almost 100,000 homes a year based on an arbitrary uplift was absolute nonsense. The adoption of the London Plan has a target of around 52,000, and delivery in London last year was around 35,000. The target we're now setting for London, roughly 80,000, is still a huge ask. But I know it's one that the Mayor is determined to rise to, and I met with him last week about this. Fourth, some will say a total of 370,000 is not enough. To this I say, ambition is critical, but we also need to be realistic. I want to now move to the Greenbelt. If we have targets for what we need to build, we next need to ensure we're building in the right places. The first port of call must be brownfield land. We are making some changes today to support this, but it's only part of the answer, Mr. Speaker. This is why we must create more strategic system for Greenbelt release to make it work for the 21st century. Local authorities will have to review their green belt if needed to meet housing targets, but they'll also need to prioritise low-quality grey belt land, for which we are setting out a definition today. And where land in the green belt is developed, new golden rules will require provision of 50% affordable housing, with a focus on social rent, as well as schools, GP surgeries and transport links that community need, and improvements to accessible green space. And let's not forget, Mr Speaker, that it was the previous government's haphazard approach to building on the Greenbelt that has seen so many of the wrong homes built in the wrong places without local services that people need. Under Labour, this will change. Now, Mr Speaker, increasing supply is of course essential to improving affordability, but we must also go further in building genuinely affordable homes. And part of this must come from developers. And the Housing Minister will be meeting with major developers later to ensure that they commit to matching our pace of reform. But an active mission-led government must also play its role. This is why today I'm calling on local authorities, housing associations and industry to work with me to deliver a council house revolution. Yeah. Mr Speaker, this isn't just a nice add-on. It is vital to getting the 1.5 million homes built, because we know that schemes with a large amount of affordable housing are likely to be completed faster. And injecting confidence and certainty into social housing is how we get Britain back to building. The previous government had to downgrade the number of new homes their affordable housing programme would deliver. And now today, I can unveil that not only between 110,000 and 130,000 affordable homes are due to be built under this programme, down from their original target of 180,000. In our worst case scenario, some 70,000 fewer families in need of a secure home will lose out, Mr Speaker. How have they let that happen? And once again, it's this government which will have to pick up the pieces. This is why today I'm announcing immediate steps for the biggest boost to social and affordable housing in a generation. Yeah. We will introduce more flexibilities in current affordable homes programme working with Homes England, and we'll bring forward details of future government investment at the spending review. I also recognise that councils and housing associations need support too. So my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set out plans at the next fiscal event to give them the rent stability that they need to borrow and invest. But, Mr Speaker, we must also maintain existing stock, which is why I'm announcing important changes to the right to buy. We have already started reviewing the increased right to buy discounts introduced in 2012, and will consult in the autumn on wider reforms to right to buy. And we are immediately increasing flexibilities for councils when using right to buy receipts. And in addition to help councils provide homes for some of the most vulnerable in society, I can also confirm today that the £450 million of the Local Authority Housing Fund will flow to them to provide 2,000 new homes. This is what Labour does. Mr Speaker, these reforms are key to realising our wider growth ambitions. Part of that comes from new homes themselves, releasing untapped potential of our towns and cities that for too long have been throttled by the insufficient and unaffordable housing. But it also flows from making it easier to build the infrastructure on which we rely. So we're making it easier to build laboratories, gigafactories, data centres and electricity grid connections. And we must make it simpler and faster to build the clean energy sources needed to meet zero carbon energy generation by 2030. We've already ended the de facto ban on onshore wind, but we're also proposing to bring large onshore wind projects back to the nationally significant infrastructure projects regime, NSIP, change the threshold for solar development to reflect the developments in solar technology, and set a stronger expectation that authorities identify sites for renewable energy. To deliver all of this, we need every local authority to have a development plan in place. Up-to-date local plans are essential to ensuring that communities have a say in how development happens. Areas with a local plan are less vulnerable to speculative developments through appeals, and yet just a third of places have one that is under 5 years old. This must change. We will therefore fix this by ending constant changes and disruption to planning policy, setting clear expectations of universal local plan coverage and stepping in directly where local authorities let residents down. Local plans ensure local engagement and are critical to making development that have local people's needs met. But in demanding more of others, we're also going to demand more of ourselves. 2 weeks ago, I said that I will not hesitate to review an application where the potential economic gain warrants it. So today, I can confirm that ministers and I will mark our homework in public, reporting against the 13-week target for turning around ministerial decisions. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know what I've said seems a lot, but this is only the first step. We plan to do so much more. We'll introduce a planning and infrastructure bill that will reform planning committees so that they focus on the right applications with the necessary expertise, further reform compulsory purchase compensation rules so that what is paid to landowners is fair but not excessive, enable local authorities to put their planning departments on sustainable footings, streamline the delivery process for critical infrastructure and provide any legal underpinning that may be needed to ensure that nature recovery and building works hand in hand. We'll also take the steps needed for universal coverage of strategic planning within this Parliament, which we will work with local leaders to develop and formalise in legislation. And shortly, we'll say more about our plan for the next generation of new towns. And because we know that this crisis cannot be fixed overnight, in the coming months, the Government will publish a long-term housing strategy for how we will transform the housing market so it delivers for working people. These are the right reforms for the decade of renewal the country so desperately needs, and we will not be deterred by those who seek to stand in the way of our country's future. The honourable members opposite may say this cannot be done, but I say that once again, I'll prove them wrong. This government will build 1.5 million homes that are high quality, well designed and sustainable. We will achieve the biggest boost to affordable housing for a generation, and we will get Britain building to spur the growth that we need. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Secretary of State just to say, if you could name between 7 and 8 minutes. Just up to you. Shadow Secretary of State, Kemi Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I echo the Right Honourable Lady's comments regarding the appalling incident in Southport? We on this side of the House send our deepest condolences to the families of all of those who are impacted. Mr. Speaker, having listened to her statement, I have many questions. I know that the Right Honourable Lady won't be able to answer all of them, certainly not in the time that we have today. So I hope that for those questions that she doesn't have the answer to now, she'll be able to provide written answers within a month and before the end of the summer recess so that we can pick up quickly when we return for her department's oral questions in the next parliamentary term. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has a mandate to deliver what they promised in their manifesto. As a party which has governed for most of the last 100 years, we respect that mandate, and it is our job, as His Majesty's loyal opposition, to scrutinise their plans and ensure that Labour are saying what they mean and, more importantly, doing what they say. But with that right to deliver their manifesto come many responsibilities. Labour now have a responsibility, unlike in a manifesto, they have a responsibility to be crystal clear about what they actually want to do to avoid prolonged uncertainty. They now have a responsibility to understand and address the concerns of councillors and local residents. They now have a responsibility to explain the economics and allocate the funding, which we all know will be needed for this plan. And they now have a responsibility not to be contradictory in what they are setting out. So they mustn't make promises which any impartial observer knows can't be delivered. And crucially, they mustn't break their commitments early. And yet, Mr. Speaker, we are already seeing changes to what they committed to. On the 20th of June, the Chancellor stated that they would update the NPPF within 100 days. So why is Labour now briefing that it will be before the end of the year? That's a lot more than 100 days. They've just started, they're already changing their targets. So will the Right Honourable Lady confirm that the NPPF will be updated and in effect by mid-October, the deadline that they set for themselves? They are proposing an 8-week consultation over summer holidays for their updates to the NPPF. This is the third set of updates that we will now have in a year. In the previous consultation on the NPPF in 2023, we had 2,600 responses. How will they have a meaningful consultation, which is what the legislation requires, that respects the input of local planning authorities and others? There will be legal challenges. Are they ready for them? They are proposing multiple changes to planning, the NPPF update, new primary legislation, the Honourable Lady just described, changes to nutrient neutrality, which they've recently converted to, and the NSIP, just to name a few. So the Right Honourable Lady says she wants to end constant changes and disruption to planning policy. That's great, but how is she going to avoid creating years of uncertainty and making it harder for local authorities and developers to build new housing as all of these changes are worked through? As I said to her the last time we sat opposite each other, these things do take time and these things are not as straightforward as she is laying out. The government will not be able to deliver its ambitions unless it recognises that. But what is most interesting in this statement, Mr. Speaker, is that she confirms that she is reducing the housing need calculation for London. Can she confirm if that reduction will apply to other urban areas? And can she explain why she is reducing the need for cities like London to build more housing when they are the ones who have the infrastructure to support it? Why is she forcing suburban and rural areas to take more housing when there are schools in Hackney, like de Beauvoir Primary School and Randall Creamer Primary School, that are shutting down because they don't have enough pupils? Why is she doing that? The government is talking about the grey belt in the planning framework. It's very interesting. I've had a quick look through. They define it, but what limited contribution to the 5 green belt purposes actually means in planning terms? What does that actually mean? Because if they're not clear, planning inspectors will determine that, and we will yet again have more and more local opposition. It is also interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the government is considering changes to restrict the right to buy. The Right Honourable Lady has told us very proudly how she was able to buy her own council house. Can she, at least one certainly, can she confirm to us that following these changes, young people across England will still be able to exercise the same right to buy that she herself had in 2007? Mr. Speaker, there is also a responsibility to address the concerns of councillors and local residents. I know from my own constituency the references that they have to traveller sites will cause some concern. The fact that she has stood up and said many of the housing allocations will be surprising. This is very difficult for local councils and local communities to deal with. Where is the respect for local decision making? We're not saying that they shouldn't be ambitious, but they're going to have to take local government in hand when they do this. They say they want to impose exacting mandatory housing targets on local authorities. When we had the advisory target, it was so that councils could make sure that they could do better, not do worse. So it is wrong for her to claim that this was us removing mandatory housing targets. Councillors have repeatedly told me that they are afraid that they will be forced, under a duty to cooperate, to sacrifice their own green spaces to take the housing need that the urban leaders who are her friends fail to meet. So what's she going to say to reassure leaders in places like Bromsgrove, Wychavon and South Staffordshire? And what penalties will she apply to local leaders like Sadiq Khan who fail to meet their housing need requirements? What happens when the mayor fails to meet even these reduced targets that she has set for him? She's already let slip that she is ditching the requirement to ensure that beauty is a key part of housing, something that I was actually very proud that the previous Conservative government put at the heart of our planning reforms, because local people do want beautiful housings. So now she's telling us that she's going to be replacing what they want with a requirement to meet 1.5 million ugly houses instead. Why on earth would they take out something? Why on earth would they take out something which means so much to local communities? People deserve to live in beautiful homes, and the fact that the Labour Party doesn't care about that shows exactly how they're going to develop their policies. Their responsibility to explain the economics and set out how they will fund their proposals is also quite key. They need to ensure that the NPPF has a new growth-based approach, they say, but that's already in the NPPF. She would know if she had read read it. I bet she hasn't. The Chancellor effectively killed off some major NSIP schemes on Monday, like the Arundel bypass. Is there all this talk of prioritising infrastructure, energy projects, just a way of dressing up cuts to other kinds of infrastructure? Where is the economic analysis that her department has undertaken on the housing market? Yesterday, we all saw the Chancellor come to the dispatch box, claim not to have understood the pressure on public finances and how it was also difficult. We warned repeatedly during the election. They say one thing and they do another. They said they weren't going to raise taxes. Now we can see what they're planning. But the Chancellor did not say anything about the impact on housing. So now I'm asking the Right Honourable Lady, on behalf of the British people and local authorities, what it means for them. Is she going to follow the same playbook, pretend she didn't know what it costs to build affordable housing, or to change the planning system and impose more costs for builders, home buyers and renters? These are just a few of the questions that the government will need to answer, and I'm sure colleagues across this House will have many more questions for them. But the government is in danger of choosing the worst of all worlds, not addressing basic economics of house building, centralising decision-making, and when you look at all that, it looks like the 1.5 million homes will be a distant aspiration rather than a meaningful target. Thank you.
Well, let me start by welcoming the Right Honourable Lady to her place, and can I wish her luck for her leadership campaign now she's confirmed she's running.
Best of luck.
So it was her ambition all along to be leader of the opposition, not mine. I must say, the Honourable Lady seems to be taking to opposition very naturally. I think she'll find herself comfortable for a long, long time on those benches. I mean, the Right Honourable Lady had a lot to say in her response, and I'll come to the substance of it in a moment. And I know that the Right Honourable Lady's already put quite a few written questions in, and I look forward to many more from her once she's had a chance to read and digest her brief after the election. But it felt like there was a couple of things I'm not quite sure she understood. Firstly, and this is critical, the British people kicked them out of office in a landslide victory. And secondly, why was that? So let me just remind her. The government in which she served has left us to clear up the mess. They crashed the economy and trashed our public services. They bankrupt Britain and they covered it up. They knew that they threw the book at the doctors and then they doctored the books. She keeps speaking about the Tories' record on housing, but I'll remind her again. Year after year, the Tories failed to keep their housing targets. She speaks about the Mayor of London with their bizarre figures that they set for the Mayor. Every single year, the Conservative government failed to meet their own target, talking of promises that they can't keep. I'll come to the Right Honourable Lady's question on the MPPF consultation. It starts today, Madam Deputy Speaker, for 8 weeks, and we're asking people to engage. It's an incredibly detailed consultation because we mean business, and it wouldn't come to any surprise that the work needed to be done after the disaster of the last Tory government that ripped up the National Planning Policy Framework and made a right mess of it. The former Tory Secretary of State handed back £1.9 billion of vital funds. The Right Honourable Lady talked about the Affordable Homes grant. The last Secretary of State handed back £1.9 billion funds to the Treasury. So we will be making it more flexible, working with Homes England to get the homes that we need. The party opposite...
You're just reading. You're supposed to be answering the questions.
They are the questions. No, they're the bits I've written, actually, in regards to her questions. The party opposite is now talking to themselves and not the country. And they talk about, and the Right Honourable Lady mentioned chaos and uncertainty. I really don't know how they can say that with a straight face after the chaos and uncertainty we've had. Countless housing secretaries not knowing what was going on. And there is increases, Madam Deputy Speaker, in answer to the question. In every inner city area, there is increases in the targets. And can I remind honourable members that we inherited the most acute housing crisis in living memory. And I say to the right honourable lady, the Greenbelt definition is in the consultation. I suggest she reads it. And it also tackles beautiful homes, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we will build homes at scale. They will be beautiful. We'll protect the natural environment. We will make sure that people have the homes that they deserve and that they need. And I come to the point the right honourable lady made about councils and representing council leaders. I find that astonishing because the council leaders that I've spoke to were absolutely overjoyous with the fact that the Tories were kicked out, because the council leaders say to me that they have been left with a dire situation, an absolute dire situation. I know the members opposite like to think it's just Labour councils, but councils across the whole political spectrum have been left in a disaster situation because the party opposite did not build the homes that people need. We have a homelessness crisis in this country. We have a crisis where people under the age of 30 cannot get homes now. It is impossible for people to get on the housing ladder. That is the failure of the last Conservative government. That is what we're going to fix, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's what we're going to get on and do.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome you to your place. Can I first of all really welcome both the ambition of my right honourable friend's statement and the details involved in it and those commitments. Let's get 2 points. In terms of the targets, and the Select Committee in the last Parliament said the targets had to be mandatory. If they aren't mandatory, many councils will simply choose to ignore them. But in mandatory targets, Bushy gave an assurance that the targets were based on a proper needs assessment of each local authority and will do away with the nonsensical and arbitrary urban uplifts which you referred to in the case of London. And secondly, in terms of social housing, and I was proud to be brought up in a council house like she was. In terms of social housing, will she work closely with local authorities and look particularly at land value capture? Where the planning permission for a site uplifts the value of that site, will she ensure that the total increase in value does not go to the landowners alone, but actually is used to benefit the public purse and reduce the cost of building those homes?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I can confirm that we are getting rid of the urban uplift, and the new method of housing targets is better than the previous one, because the previous one we believe was outdated and figures the urban uplift the figures were plucked from thin air. So we believe that this will give our new method would give councils stability and certainty to plan for their homes and local services they need. In terms of land value capture, again, this will come forward with more. There's a little bit within this consultation, but there's more within the planning and infrastructure bill that will come forward, as we spoke about in the King's speech.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I welcome you to your place. May I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for giving advance sight of her statement and to associate myself and my party with her remarks about the devastating and senseless attacks in Southport. Our thoughts and prayers are with all those affected. Now, for too long under the Conservatives, we had a planning system that put developer greed over community need, a system which did not deliver the homes that we needed to tackle the crisis, but did destroy swathes of our greenbelt. But this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, raises a lot of questions. So here we go. First of all, for those local authorities which are at an advanced stage of their draft local plans, will they need to start again with the new standard method, or can they continue? Secondly, for those local authorities that have recently conducted a Greenbelt assessment, do they need to do it again under the new system, or will the current one stand? There seemed to be a conspicuous absence, Madam Deputy Speaker, of a particular target on social homes, not affordable homes, but on social homes. Will the Deputy Prime Minister take up the Liberal Democrat target of building 150,000 social homes every single year? We welcome the proposals by the government to review the compulsory purchase compensation. Will she take up the Liberal Democrat plan to put an end to land banking by reforming the Land Compensation Act so that local authorities can acquire land at a fair values? We welcome the review of the right to buy. Will the government allow local authorities to use that money to replace lost stock? The government indicated that it will be reviewing borrowing rules so that local authorities can borrow to invest. Will they allow local authorities to borrow to invest at a scale that will allow them to put an end to homelessness, overcrowding and housing register waiting lists? What powers and resources will they give to planning authorities so that they can enforce the requirement to put infrastructure first? Will they scrap the cap on developer planning fees? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Greenbelt, there are some local authorities in the London Metropolitan Greenbelt area who, even when they have accounted for all of their brownfield sites and all of their grey belt sites, they still have to build thousands and thousands of homes on the Greenbelt, land which is supposed to be designed specifically to stop urban sprawl. Will the government put anything in the MPPF that will give any protection to the concept of Greenbelt at all? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you for those questions. In terms of local plans, it depends on where they're up to in terms of the direct question you asked, and there will be a transition, and we outline that within this consultation because we recognise areas have got quite far on. And in terms of where that's up to, it very much depends on what the difference is between what their local plan says and what we've asked, and we outline all of that in the consultation as well. We've been fair to those that have already done the work, so where that work has already been done, it's just about updating it and not disregarding where people already have local plans. But I say to the Honourable Lady that a third of areas have up-to-date local plans, so I would impress on all members of this House to speak to their local authorities to ensure that they have a local plan, because that is how we critically make sure that people feel engaged as part of that process, and we protect areas of Greenbelt and other areas by ending the speculative developments that we see. In terms of social homes numbers, again, I talked about the flexibility in the Affordable Homes Grant. There's stuff within the consultation here about the right to buy, which I recognise, and how the council and also housing associations can borrow to bring up their stock. I recognise the problem we face with the homelessness crisis, and it's something that I'm particularly keen to tackle. We also talk about the compulsory purchase orders, and again we're doing a consultation on that because we think that that needs to be dealt with. We will also bring forward some of the other issues within our planning infrastructure bill. Planning will be strengthened. We've already announced 300 extra planners, local planners. We'll strengthen 106. We'll have an accelerator task force for those stalled sites that we have. And again, where there is a release of grey belt, they will be the golden rules that I outlined. So therefore, we will expect a lot from developers when they're in use of that. And also, we consult on fees as well within this consultation period. There is a lot within this consultation, but I believe that it will make a significant difference with engagement with local areas and to make sure that we meet the housing target that we need and that the country desperately deserves.
Rachel Hopkins.
Deputy Speaker, too many families are housed in substandard, overcrowded flats created through permitted development rights, such as former office block conversions. So will the Deputy Prime Minister give families in my constituency of Luton South and South Bedfordshire some hope for the future by confirming Labour's commitment to good quality, affordable family houses, including council houses, under her proposals?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right. 14 years of the Tories have left social and affordable housing in a crisis, and this is to fix the overall problem that we've got with the housing crisis that we face. We have to have more social housing for rent, and I hear this. The right honourable lady opposite was talking about speaking to local councils, but members here, including new members, will know that their casework that comes through in their box already, their posts that they've seen, and their local leaders are saying what a desperate situation it is, and it's because of the supply problem, and it's because we need to fix the problem around social and affordable housing, and that's why we've got our golden rules. That's why we're going to strengthen 106 and expect the developers to do what they say they're going to do, and all of our departments are going to work to make sure that the infrastructure is there so people get the homes that they need locally and that they see the infrastructure that improves their local area and nature.
Desmond Swain.
New Forest District has its local plan recently agreed on the basis of a local housing need. When will it be required to reopen that assessment on the basis of her new algorithm, and that target become mandatory?
Well, the short answer is when the next point when it updates. But as I said before in my answer to the Honourable Lady, those that have an up-to-date local plan won't be made to start again. So it's good, and I commend the Honourable Gentleman's local authority for having an up-to-date plan, because that is the best way to have consultation with your local area and provide the housing that local people need. And that's what this government wants to do, working with local leaders, working with mayors to make sure we deliver the houses that local people want and deal with the crisis that they face.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable friend for making a superb statement. My right honourable friend knows that she will have strong support on these benches for building homes that she has identified that we particularly need in Liverpool to tackle homelessness, rising costs and the huge waiting lists for social housing. But councils will be reluctant to build if they know they will simply end up in the hands of private landlords who exploit the right to buy. So I welcome her review into the higher discounts imposed by the last government. And can she assure me that this will be a rapid review? Because with the mess that she's inherited, there is no time to waste in clearing this up.
I thank my right honourable friend for that question, and again, short answer is yes, it will be a rapid review. We've already been speaking about this even before the election, and we want to make sure that people take part in that review, but we're also very clear that the right to buy formula that the government set out in 2012, the discounts, means that councils just cannot replace the houses that are bought under the right to buy scheme. We believe that people should have the right to buy, but it has to be balanced against what the public give in discounts on our social housing stock and making sure that we can replace that stock for those that desperately need it.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This announcement, quite frankly, will be a disaster for my Hamble Valley constituency. And in Hamble Valley, Liberal Democrat Eastleigh Borough Council has built over the last few years double the number of houses required by targets and assessments. So can the Secretary of State confirm that she will take into account retrospective building numbers for those areas who have already built more than their fair share? And why is she placing even more pressure on local services in the South East where house prices are the most expensive, but leaving cities alone and not increasing house numbers there too?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, they do increase. They do increase, and the new method that we'll be using is based upon what stock and also the affordability. So I ask the honourable member to look at the consultation on it, because what we want to do is be honest that if there is a particular shortage, and there's many areas that has a particular shortage, that we have to be building those homes. We stood on an election mandate to do that. Now, local plans, I don't know if the honourable gentleman's local authority has them. We will engage with them on that, but we do not have the homes that we desperately need. And I say to the honourable gentleman, engage with the local authority, get those local plans in place and work with us to build the houses that his constituents desperately need.
Yeah. Liz Twist.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today, and particularly welcome the acknowledgement that where there are new developments on Greenbelt, that the facilities that go with them are so necessary. But can I ask the Secretary of State what steps should be taken to ensure that local communities can hold developers to account for the protection of our habitat and open spaces when they come forward with plans?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And Labour has a brownfield first policy, and within the outlines that we've put in the release of Greybelt, there are very strict golden rules on that, and we will be supporting local authorities with making sure that they have the best from 106 notices and that the golden rules apply. I actually think that the consultation that we put out today with the proposals for the national policy, the MPPF, the proposals that we're putting within the MPPF will actually strengthen the release instead of that haphazard way that we've seen it at the moment. And we'll also see the kind of homes that people desperately need in their areas that are affordable to them, including homes for social rent.
Dick Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Secretary of State confirm two things? One, where local residents have complied with her coming mandatory targets through a neighbourhood plan rather than a local plan, that neighbourhood plan will reign supreme and will not be trampled over by planning inspectors subsequently. And secondly, that protected landscape, what used to be called an area of outstanding natural beauty, of which my constituency is 80%, but now called national landscape, that will also still be of significant protection within the planning system.
Yes, I can confirm that neighbourhood plans will remain and also that the protections remain. I think it's really important, and again what we're saying in terms of the release of the grey belt is that it has to be for the benefit of local natural spaces. We want to see areas where people can, within walking distance, have access. Many people do not have access to those areas. They're inaccessible on the green belt, but we will be protecting, as we have always done, and there's no change to that, areas of natural beauty and parks, etc.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the new MP and former Cabinet Member for Housing of arguably Britain's most successful new town, Milton Keynes.
No way.
I welcome today's statement. It is exactly what we've needed to hear. The struggles and the conflicts that we've had trying to deliver the housing that people in Milton Keynes need has been enormous and a real waste of resource, to be quite frank. But we need not to only build new houses, but to build new communities. Will she meet with me and Milton Keynes City Council so we can discuss how we can help deliver this essential mission so that everyone has a place to call home?
Well, can I welcome the member for Milton Keynes to her place? I've visited Milton Keynes quite a number of times, and what a fantastic example of a Labour new town. And I think the honourable member has already been quite pithy in getting a meeting arranged with my housing minister, and I look forward to hearing more about how we can learn from Milton Keynes and have the next generation of new towns coming forward.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. One of the documents that was circulated to colleagues today was an MPPF with track changes, and buried on page 55 there's a footnote that says that this following sentence is proposed for deletion. The availability of agricultural land used for food production should be considered when deciding what sites are most appropriate for development. That's in the existing MPPF. It is proposed that that's taken out. The UK is only 60% self-sufficient for food, down from the mid-80s when we were 78% self-sufficient. Is the government taking enough account of self-sufficiency in food?
Yes, and we believe that it's already considered within the MPPF, and there's already guidance on agriculture land as well, and in particular high-grade agricultural land. So we believe the protections are already in there in terms of food.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Deputy Prime Minister on her statement today. Slightly disappointed with some of the comments from the Conservative benches, but I hope the Deputy Prime Minister will reject them as the British people rejected them on the 4th of July. Madam Deputy Speaker, like the Deputy Prime Minister, I am fortunate enough, like most people who have a mayor in England, to live under a Labour mayor. Will the Deputy Prime Minister work with me, work with Labour mayors, including her own and my own, and councillors and members of this place, to ensure that we get the right kind of developments in the right places?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he's absolutely right, because what we're trying to achieve today, and the legislation we'll be bringing forward as announced in the King's Speech, is about how we strengthen local consultation. I've already said to members that only a third of local authorities have up-to-date local plans, so this is a wake-up call to say, as part of local planning and having local plans in place, there is an obligation to consult and then consult again on the final plan. So many people who are frustrated by housing that goes up is because of this speculative development, because there hasn't been that engagement. So what we're proposing today, and we've already met with mayors, we've met with council leaders, this is a push that has come not just from local leaders and mayors, but from the voters. I believe that's why we won as large as we did at the general election, because people want to see that change. So we know that that engagement has to continue. We know that we have to work with local leaders and mayors to make this plan a reality, and we're going to work with them to make sure that we get those homes and we get the infrastructure and that we get the next generation of social and affordable housing that the people of this country need.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and good luck in your new role. It is possible to have successful development, but from experience, it has to be something that you do with people and not to people. This is the latter. These pernicious top-down targets have the practical effect at ground level of setting one town against another, one village against another, and one local community against another. And given the Chancellor's statement on public spending yesterday, who will pay for the tens of billions of pounds of infrastructure that would be required to make all of this work? All experience shows that on development and house building, the man or the woman in Whitehall really does not know best. Yeah. Why then are you going back to the old, failed way of doing it, which will not work?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
I mean, I'm shocked to tell the honourable member that the MPPF was an MPPF before we took government as well. So national targets have always been there. It's not something that I've dreamt up. But the important thing is our new method is clearly based upon what the housing stock and the affordability and the need in their area. This is a need that has created a housing crisis in this country, and that is why the electorate elected the Labour government on the mandate that we did, because we said we are going to fix the housing crisis that we've inherited. And I would say that this is again about local plans. I implore the honourable member to get with his local authority, to get a local plan, to engage with local people and to listen to those that are waiting desperately, probably the thousands in his constituency, desperate for a home that they know will never come.
Joe White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My local authority has just agreed its local plan during the general election, and it was the first authority in the country to commit Section 106 funds to our local hospital. As Deputy Leader, I was very proud to lead on this. I see Section 106 funding as the most effective method of mitigating against the impacts of development and bringing in much needed funding for infrastructure. How does the Deputy Prime Minister envision how Section 106 funding can be reformed to make it a far more effective method of bringing in the infrastructure spending?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I congratulate the honourable member, not just for her getting to this place, but also for the work she did previously, and also congratulate the local authority for the work they've done on having a local plan, and also that making sure that they did get what they needed out of the Section 106. And she's absolutely right to say that it's important, because those health needs, whether it's GP services, hospitals, schools, or whatever the infrastructure is, Section 106 plays a very important role, and it needs to be strengthened. We talk about it in here a little bit. We talk about the golden rules that we will apply if Grey Belt is released, but we'll be working with our department to ensure that local authorities are given the resources they need and the expertise from here, so that we can make sure that they get the best out of 106 notices.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thousands of new homes are planned in Kings Lynn in my constituency, but that development requires transport and other infrastructure. So will the Secretary of State work with the Transport Secretary and the Chancellor to unlock the funding for the A10 West Winch Housing Access Road so that development can proceed?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, there is a challenge that we have inherited, and I hope that the honourable member's area has got a local plan when it comes to what they're requiring, and therefore they can push for part of their infrastructure as part of their Section 106. So I'll happily engage through the Minister on that particular issue, but I'm wondering whether the honourable member was in the chamber yesterday and realised what a mess his government left us in.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome you to your new place. Can I start by thanking the Deputy Prime Minister for the speed at which she and her fantastic team are tackling the housing crisis. It is welcome news in Luton North, where my surgeries have been consistently full of people struggling in overcrowded housing, facing skyrocketing rents for substandard conditions. And we have daily cases of people subjected to eviction notices through no fault of their own. Does she agree with me that the government's new plans to build genuinely affordable housing and for this council house revolution to start can't come soon enough for towns like mine?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I think she articulates what many members across the House, even members opposite, will recognise in terms of the challenges that we face. And this issue has been ducked for 14 years by the Conservatives, and in fact it went backwards because of the changes they made to the MPPF in last year. And that's why we're making absolutely no bones about the fact that we do mean to deliver, and that's why this consultation is so important and why we've put that out there now. And I say to honourable members, we do intend to move at pace. People who are in temporary accommodation, 150,000 children that haven't got a home to call their home. I think about that every single night and think there isn't a day that we can afford to waste in terms of dealing with that situation for them. And I promise them across your constituency and everybody else's that I'll do everything I can to make sure that they have a home.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now then, I welcome the news of the Council House revolution. And we all know that the Deputy Prime Minister is a little bit of an expert when it comes to council housing. But can she confirm that priority will be given to British families, veterans and pensioners?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we have confirmed that people with a local connection will get priority in those homes. But I also say to the honourable gentleman who tries to make a quip about the fact that I grew up in a council house, is that many, you know, the situation that I hear, and when I was took on this brief, is that actually people used to talk about my childhood as if I grew up in poverty, but there's many kids today that if they got a council house, it would be considered they'd won the lottery. Those children today can't have that. So we will build the homes. We will prioritise that people locally can get them, and we'll make sure that first-time buyers get first dibs as well. There's a number of measures that we're putting in place to make sure that the homes that are built are there for the people that need it.
Ben Goldsborough.
Madam Deputy Speaker, residents in Heatherset, Mulbarton and Loddon have sadly had all their fingers burnt by the old planning policies that were in place from the previous government. Can you give me assurances that going forward, the Section 106 will be strengthened to ensure that public good, public infrastructure will be in place to make sure that our new housing is accessible for everyone and gives them the resources they need to live a very happy life?
Deputy Prime Minister.
There is parts of this consultation which does look at how we can strengthen 106, and we want to do that in conjunction with local authorities. We are also bringing forward at a later date through this Parliament, which I mentioned in my statement, about strategic planning and also the planning and infrastructure bill. So this is the start of a process, but we know there's a lot more to do, and I look forward to your engagement with that.
Wendy Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, I'm no NIMBY, but today what we're seeing is a lurch back to top-down mandatory targets that will ride roughshod through local communities like those that I represent across Aldridge Brownhills and local decision-making. I do agree with the Deputy Prime Minister, though, when she says that the first port of call must be brownfield land. So can she confirm that she will do this by giving full financing to brownfield land remediation and reclamation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we think we can better use brownfield funding, but I say to the honourable member that it's not riding roughshod over local decisions and what local people want, because having mandatory housing targets and plans means that people will be able to decide. What we're saying and what we said at the general election is that we will build 1.5 million homes. We said that really clear, and we have a mandate to do that. We think the new method for housing targets works better. We think it will deliver for people, including the affordability test, and therefore we will deliver the houses that her constituency needs, and I would encourage her to engage with that process with her local authority.
I am planning to end this statement around 20 past, sir. Could you please help each other by keeping questions short? I call Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This has to be the most important statement I've heard since being in the House, and York has really suffered with the proliferation of luxury accommodation, second homes and short-term holiday lets. So I welcome this so much. Could she say what steps can be taken for plans, current developers currently with plans in the system, so that we can pivot to ensure that we hit the targets that we need for having the affordable and social housing we desperately need right now?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady that we do need to have these affordable homes that we desperately need, and that's why, depending on where her local authority is in the process, we'll be setting out those targets which are likely to be increased for her local area, and for them to engage in that process. The golden rules are there, which will again allow more affordability where there is a restrictive release of grey belt, and also that we will ensure that we help and support on the affordability and making sure there isn't a gaming of the system, so that we get the best that we can out of Section 106.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I strongly endorse the sentiment and purpose of the Deputy Prime Minister's statement and policy statement today. She's aware that the planning system is, as others have said, fueled by greed rather than need. And in a place like Cornwall, which is not NIMBY, it's one of the fastest growing places in the United Kingdom, it's almost trebled its housing stock in the last 60 years, and yet the housing problems of local people have got worse. So my question to the Deputy Prime Minister is that house building targets are a means to an end, and surely it would be far better in places like Cornwall that those targets be set on addressing the need rather than simply allowing developers to fill their boots.
Prime Minister. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and that's what the new formula does. What we're trying to do is assess the need for areas, and in particular on what their current stock is, taking account of that, but also about affordability. And I suspect Cornwall has a particular challenge with that as well. But what we're hoping to do as part of this as well is strengthen the plans on Section 106, the new Homes Accelerator Task Force, which will help get those sites that have already got planning permission moving forward. And by working across Whitehall, we'll go about to deliver the infrastructure that people want as well, because that is the other big issue that keeps coming back, is where we have speculative sites or release of greenbelt, or where there is big housing in an area, that the infrastructure is incredibly critical to that point, and that's what we need to overcome, and that's what we're clear that we need to do as a government.
Helena Dollymore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Hastings and Rye, we are at the sharp end of the housing crisis, and we desperately need more affordable and more council homes. So I really welcome today's statement. The party opposite may behave like this is a zero-sum game between building more desperately needed homes and protecting the environment, but we on this side know that is not the case. So can I ask my right honourable friend what this new government's approach will be to ensure we have sustainable development, protecting our environment and making sure we have the infrastructure, including sewage pipes, and preventing flooding while building the homes that my constituents so desperately need?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member for her question, and also welcome her to her place. And she's absolutely right, and it builds on the question that I answered previously, that we have to protect our green belt, and we think the proposals that we're putting forward does that. But it also means that we have the right type of homes and we have the infrastructure, and that also that as part of this process that there will be nature considerations and the rules around that, there is the infrastructure that people need, and that there is access to the countryside and healthy living. There's a number of factors within the consultation that the Honourable Lady can look at, that will talk about how we're delivering better, greener areas for people, which hopefully her constituents will be able to get behind.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's good to see you in that chair. I'm not sure whether the
Secretary of State has discussed her proposals with the Secretary of State for Agriculture or the National Farmers Union, but the answer that she gave earlier in relation to food production was risible. What she's actually announced today is effectively a recipe for disposing of the land that will be needed to feed our children and our grandchildren. And just before she goes ahead with this, could she tell the House how many planning consents have been granted, are sitting there unbuilt out, and shouldn't we be using those first?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Who was in charge?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but I really do, with absolute respect, say to the honourable gentleman, please read the consultation, because we do think that we do support our agriculture, which is around just over 10% of the land that we have, and we will make sure there's best and most versatile. And I talked before about protecting the land that is of best value, and we will do that. And the land that we're talking about, grey belt, which we define within the MPPF consultation, is not agricultural land. It's disused garages and it's other things of that nature, not, as the honourable gentleman wants people to believe, the land that we need for food.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's twin ambitions set out today to get Britain building, to provide the homes that we need, and to make sure that we have the infrastructure required to support them, like schools and GP surgeries. These are of equal importance, and you cannot have one without the other. Can she confirm that the aim of her package on social and affordable housing is to go net positive, so that the number of social rent homes is rising rather than falling, and achieve it in the first year of this Parliament?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I welcome the honourable lady to her place, and within the first, it is going to be a challenge, but we're absolutely desperate to try and meet that challenge as quickly as we can. That's why we're moving at pace with the consultation exercise that we've put forward today, and we will do that as quickly as we possibly can, so we can make sure that we are making the affordable and social housing we need, as well as making sure that we have the green spaces and the infrastructure that people desperately need as well.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you. Welcome to the Chair, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome to the Honourable Lady to her new role. I appreciate that she won't have time to wax lyrical today about our vision of aesthetics, nor to extend at length on the relationship between truth and beauty. Nevertheless, given the welcome reference in her announcement about proportionality and the link between the existing built environment and the scale of development, will she also take into account the character and style of development? She may know that I've served on the Building Beautiful Commission and the Office for Place. Will she agree to meet the Office for Place to discuss beauty? For she will know that the wealthy can always live in beautiful places, in beautiful homes, but that people from council houses, as she and I originate, deserve their chance to know, to sense and to see beauty.
To Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I absolutely agree with everything that he says, and I know the Minister will be meeting shortly with all of stakeholders, and I think he's got a meeting with those that you've just mentioned as well in the coming days, but I would love to work with the honourable gentleman to make sure that we build the houses that people deserve, whether those social, affordable housing or any other housing. They should be beautiful, they should have character and style, and we're determined to make that happen.
Now Shabar Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I also thank my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, for her statement and the focus that she has rightly given to the delivery of genuinely affordable homes, which will provide much needed housing security to many of my constituents in Gillingham and Raynham. But recognising some of the immediate homelessness challenges felt by local authorities, can she detail how the plans she has announced today relieve pressures on homelessness and temporary accommodation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right to talk about homelessness and the pressures that local authorities face, and it's this issue in particular that I feel quite personal about, because the amount of stories I've heard, not just since I've been in the shadow role as previously, but in the role that I am fortunate and humbled enough to have now is that we cannot continue with the homelessness crisis. Behind every single one of those figures is a human being, and it really does have an impact like poverty does. Housing has a significant impact on people's lives and opportunities, and that's why, as Deputy Prime Minister and in my role, we'll be bringing different leaders together, a local and regional and here, to make sure that we can really tackle homelessness, because we need to do something about those figures. We've inherited a really poor state of affairs, and I'm determined to make sure that we do something about that.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister for her statement. Residents in my constituency of Waveney Valley, as in so much of the country, are finding that many of them are being priced out of being able to live in their local community. The homes that are being built are just not affordable to local people. So I welcome the statements today on affordable housing, but could the Deputy Prime Minister set out, of the 1.5 million homes that she's pledged to build, how many does she expect to be affordable, and in particular how many does she expect to be council homes? And could she also set out what action will be taken to address the fact that we have 1 million empty homes in this country?
To Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member for his comment. It's really difficult to set out in detail at a particular local level because it's subject to obviously Section 106 and the type of development. That's why local plans are really important and us supporting that. But I would refer him to the consultation document on, for example, the release of Grey Belt, which talks about a minimum of 50% of affordable. And again, that depends upon what local need is. You have to try and get the balance right, because if local areas are saying we need X, and then I say, well, you're going to have Y, then that's a challenge. But what we have said is that if the Grey Belt is released, that 50% must be affordable. That can be chosen by the local area. If they say, I want a particular amount of social rents, that they can put that in there. And I would say that, again, looking at the document, looking at the methodology that we're using, I think, and looking at the affordability test, I think that that makes things much better in terms of giving a number and a figure that reflects the realities of people in the local area.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I too welcome you to your place. The Deputy Prime Minister will be all too aware the extent to which the current planning system is failing communities like mine. Not building the affordable homes people are crying out for, not delivering the infrastructure my growing communities need, and not even protecting some of the most nature-rich parts of our countryside. Because while the opposition benches might not like to hear this, under the last government, Greenbelt approvals, often haphazard, increased tenfold, while brownfield approvals halved. Yeah. Will the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents that her golden rules will ensure brownfield and greyfield sites are truly prioritised and infrastructure and affordability is prioritised too, to finally deliver growth that works for communities like mine?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to mention the haphazard way in which the Greenbelt has been built upon under the last government. You'd think that it never happened in some of the responses I've had back from the opposite side of the chamber. But I'm clear that brownfield should always be the first port of call, and that's why we've been making brownfield development easier within the MPPF, and that we'll also be taking firm action to limit the scope of gaming and consulting on how to stop developments who have paid over the odds for land, using that as an excuse for negotiating their Section 106 contributions down. So there's a number of measures, including our golden rules, that will make sure, hopefully, we push towards brownfield, and that the release of Grey Belt has to be within our golden rules.
Ben Opsijecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Secretary of State and Minister made the decision to approve the appeal made by Envar Composting in relation to the proposed medical waste incinerator on the edge of St Ives, despite the rejection of the initial application by the Conservatives and Labour on Cambridgeshire County Council. Local residents in St Ives, as well as the impacted rural villages of Somersham, Bluntisham, Colne, Pidley, Woodhurst, Oldhurst and Needingworth, are hugely concerned that their opposition and concerns have not been heard by the Secretary of State. So given NHS England's 2023 clinical waste strategy states a need to reduce the use of incineration and details a strategic priority that requires in-house waste processing capability to be developed, why has the Secretary of State approved a medical waste incinerator against local wishes, and will she meet with local residents to hear their concerns?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his contribution, and in the specific case, dealt with it myself personally, but what I can say to you is that when making those decisions, we weigh up the advice and the planning expertise that we have in there, and those decisions will be made based upon that evidence that we have. It's an objective way of making a decision.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's plan to put building homes at the heart of our mission to raise living standards and also to ensure that what we build reflects local views. Will she give an update on our plans to give councils greater powers to tackle the scourge of second homes that, particularly in Cornwall, put a drag not just on our community but our economy as well, so that we can unlock supply through this channel?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and like I said in the opening statement today, this is the first steps. We know there's so much more that we need to do. We've got a significant amount of legislation coming forward, which the Housing Minister will be able to update the House on going forward. But this MPPF is about particular making sure we get the housing targets, but I understand the point that the member's making, and we need to address many more issues that we face in housing, and that's why we had significant amounts of it in the King's speech.
Sir John Whittingdale.
There are currently an additional 3,000 homes being built in Malden and Heybridge in my constituency, and the Liberal Democrat-controlled Chelmsford wants to build another 3,000 at Hammonds Farm in my constituency. Yet the local roads, health services, education services are all under intolerable pressure. So what will the Secretary of State do to ensure that necessary infrastructure is put in place before these developments take place?
Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, the honourable gentleman will know that his government was in government for 14 years and could have resolved this, and this is part of the reason why we're consulting on the revised MPPF, because we recognise, and I've said to many honourable members in the chamber today, that infrastructure is critical, that people often reject the housing proposals because they don't see sufficient infrastructure. That's why we have the golden rules. That's why I've asked all of the departments to look at what we can do to make sure that that infrastructure is there, and that's why we'll support strengthening of Section 106 to make sure that developers don't try and squeeze out of what they were promised as part of that development.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend has said, this has got to be about building communities, not just about building homes. But on too many occasions in my constituency, residents have been left for too long on incomplete and unadopted estates. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that both the social and physical infrastructure must be delivered at the earliest opportunity in developments, and that developers must be held to account for the delivery of this?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I absolutely agree, and it goes back again to the point that far too often is the objections to development is because people don't see the infrastructure, and people see that in some cases developers try and wriggle out of their obligations. As I said and set out in the consultation document we're putting forward today, is that we believe that it will strengthen local authorities' hands, and that we'll be able to make sure that we get that infrastructure that we desperately need alongside those houses.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister has outlined the need for house building and the dire need that there is across the street in the United Kingdom, and set out a system to try and achieve that. However, one of the things that's really important is those people who are trying to get mortgages. For instance, here in the mainland here, those who have earned £75,000 a year are having difficulty getting a mortgage. Those back home in Northern Ireland who probably are earning much less, say 40, 45,000, have no chance of getting a mortgage. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister this question: what can be done to help people get mortgages and thereby be able to buy a home and move forward? Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend, I'll say, for his contribution today. And he's absolutely right that we've got to fix the situation, not just on affordability so those houses come forward. We spoke in the general election, and we'll be bringing proposals forward for a mortgage guarantee scheme. But hopefully the new deal for working people, which is coming forward with the legislation in October time, to make sure that we make work pay. And the Chancellor announced again for public sector workers pay rise, and we recently wrote to the Low Pay Commission to expand their remit, so we'll make sure that over 1 million people will get a pay rise, because jobs that pay will also mean that people can then afford to have their own home.
We now come to the statement from the Foreign Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I want to make a statement on the situation in Lebanon. On the 27th of July, Hezbollah launched a series of rockets into northern Israel and the occupied Golan Heights. Tragically, in Majd al-Shams, one strike killed at least 12 civilians, young people, one just 10 years old, who were playing football. I expend my deepest sympathies to their families and to the Jewish community as they grieve for their loved ones. The government is unequivocal in condemning this horrific attack and calling on Hezbollah to cease their rocket strikes. This atrocity is a consequence of indiscriminate firing, paying no heed at all to civilian life. This attack is part of an intensifying pattern of fighting around the Israeli-Lebanese border. For months now, we've been teetering on the brink. The risk of further escalation and regional destabilisation is now more acute than ever. At the end of my first week in office, I spoke to Lebanese Prime Minister McCarthy, and yesterday I called him again to express my concern at this latest incident. I've also visited Israel and discussed the situation with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Katz. And I will visit Lebanon as soon as the circumstances allow. We support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international humanitarian law. And as I said before, they are in a tough neighbourhood, threatened by those who want to see their annihilation. Over 40, including 24 civilians, have now been killed by Hezbollah strikes in northern Israel and the Golan Heights. And tens and thousands of Israelis have been displaced from the area, while in Lebanon, over 100 civilians have died and almost 100,000 are displaced. A widening of this conflict is in nobody's interest. Indeed, the consequences could be catastrophic. That is why we continue to press for a diplomatic solution based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which called for a long-term solution based on the disarmament of all armed groups in Lebanon, no foreign forces in Lebanon without its government's consent, and no armed forces other than the UN and Lebanese government troops deployed south of the Litani River near the border with Israel. It is why, even in the face of serious provocation, our Council is restrained. We welcome the Lebanese government's statement condemning violence against civilians and urging the cessation of all violence. We continue to support the Lebanese armed forces. The UK has provided more training and equipment to 4 of its land border regiments, and we're working intensively with the United Nations and our partners, including the United States and France, to encourage de-escalation. Madam Deputy Speaker, with our partners, we will do all we can to prevent the outbreak of full-scale conflict, but the risk is rising. I therefore want to underline the government's advice to British nationals. We advise against all travel to the north of Israel and the north of the Golan Heights, and against all travel to Lebanon. There are frequent artillery exchanges and airstrikes. Tensions are high and the situation could deteriorate rapidly. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, chaired a COBRA meeting this morning, and I'm working with Foreign Office consular teams to make sure we are prepared for all scenarios. But if this conflict escalates, the government cannot guarantee we'll be able to evacuate everyone immediately. People may be forced to shelter in place. And history teaches us that in a crisis like this one, it is far safer to leave while commercial flights are still running. rather than running the risk of becoming trapped in a war zone. My message then to British nationals in Lebanon is therefore quite simple: leave. Madam Deputy Speaker, the tensions on the Israeli-Lebanese border are one aspect of a wider crisis in the Middle East. Across the region, we see evidence of malign Iranian activity in their support for Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis and other groups whose actions destabilise the region and who show scant regard for the death and destruction this causes. This government is committed to working alongside our partners to counter Iranian threats. Meanwhile, in Gaza, fighting continues. The scenes at the Khadija school, civilians killed, shocking images of injured children underline the desperate conditions endured by civilians, and the reports of the humanitarian situation remain sobering, with the threat of disease and famine looming ever larger. This government continues to do all it can to provide relief to Palestinian civilians. I recently announced new funding for field hospitals run by UK Med, who have treated more than 60,000 Gazans since the conflict began. And we've restored funding for UNRWA, providing 21 million in new funds to the agency, able to deliver aid at the scale needed. But what is urgently needed, Madam Deputy Speaker, is an immediate ceasefire. All the hostages must be freed. The fighting must end, and much, much more aid must get into Gaza. A ceasefire would not only alleviate the suffering in Gaza and secure the hostages' release, it would also reduce tensions across the region, helping to prevent an escalatory cycle in Lebanon, and offer hope of renewed peace processes between Israel and Palestinians. As I said in the House in my first appearance as Foreign Secretary before this dispatch box, we are committed to playing a full diplomatic role in efforts to secure a just and lasting peace. Our overarching goal is clear: a viable sovereign Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not want to see more civilians killed, more innocent lives cut short, but the risks are clear. We are urging de-escalation of the current crisis while ensuring we are prepared if diplomatic efforts do not succeed, with a clear call today for all British nationals in Lebanon to leave immediately. I commend the statement to the House.
Yeah. Sharon Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the Foreign Secretary for advanced sight of his statement. This is indeed a matter of profound concern and gravity for us all. The tragic and senseless attack in the Golan Heights over the weekend must be met with full, unequivocal condemnation. Children and young people innocently playing football with bright futures and the rich tapestry of life ahead of them had their lives cruelly snatched away. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, will be with their parents, siblings, friends and all those affected by this monstrous act. Madam Deputy Speaker, the risk of further escalation across the blue line is real, and the government is right to take it seriously. We do not want to see a widening of this painful conflict, and the opening of a new front would be in nobody's interest. If we are to avoid it, all involved need to show restraint. We should be crystal clear that includes Hezbollah. Let nobody forget this is a proscribed terrorist organisation which has no regard for human life, human dignity or human rights, and nobody should be in any doubt about Hezbollah's intention towards the world's only Jewish state. And Hezbollah supports Hamas, another proscribed terrorist organisation, which has also inflicted appalling suffering, with the worst atrocity committed against Jewish people since the Holocaust and the Second World War. Hezbollah must cease its attacks right now. That message must be aimed at Tehran too. The government must use the communication channels that we have with Iran to be extremely firm with the regime. Iran must use its influence to rein in its proxies and stop destabilising the Middle East. But beyond stern words, we must use all the tools at our disposal to disrupt malign behaviour by Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah, including tough sanctions to crack down on finance sources and flows of weapons. Sanctions must also demonstrate that terror group leaders cannot escape the consequences of their action. The government must also rally the international community to collectively reaffirm its commitment to implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, because that is critical for a long-term peace. If I may, I'd like to press the Foreign Secretary on 3 specific points. First, what steps is he taking to amplify the advice that he has already and rightly given so clearly, that British nationals in Lebanon should leave now? What is he doing in country to get the message across and make information on how to leave quickly and easily accessible? What steps is he taking to look after the interests of the Foreign Office and other dependents in Lebanon? Secondly, does he have an estimate of how many Brits are actually in Lebanon? And thirdly, what discussions has he had with key partners in the region who, like us, wish to see a destabilising escalation averted? Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to conclude by making a broader point. We are clearly at a critical point in this conflict. We could see Hamas accept the deal on the table, which would see a pause in the fighting, a return of the hostages, a flood of aid, and the space created to bring about the conditions for a sustainable peace. Or we could see the suffering in Gaza grind on and a dangerous escalation along the blue line. This is the time to be putting maximum pressure on Hamas, as we have been discussing today, and on Hezbollah. It is also the time to remain in close dialogue with Israel and maintain our position as a trusted partner, because that is critical, whether for getting more aid into Gaza or for urging restraint by Israel. The Foreign Secretary will have heard concerns in recent days about what many of us perceive as a shift in the government's approach to our close ally Israel, including in relation to the International Criminal Court. The Foreign Secretary gave me an answer on that point in oral questions earlier today. We should make clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that while recognition of Palestine is important and does not need to be at the end of the process, it equally cannot be at the start of the process, where it could be seen as a reward for violence and for terror. I do hope that going forward the government will not only continue to work to avoid an escalation along the blue line, but also maintain this close relationship with Israel. The trust and friendship that exists between the UK and Israel matters because it allows us candidly to discuss all aspects of the current conflict with Israeli counterparts at the very highest levels, in addition to using our influence as a member of the United Nations Security Council. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for the tone and the cross-party nature in which he made his remarks. He knows better than many in this House how serious it is dealing with any crisis that might escalate at this time. He's absolutely right to draw the relationship between Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, with Iran. Of course, we keep our sanctions regime under review, but he's right to press the case about the axis, and he's absolutely right that, of course, we keep all channels open, those that we have with Iran. He'll be pleased to know that I spoke to Prime Minister Mizrani. We talked about the blue line. He will recall that I was in Lebanon a few months before the election was called, and I indicated in oral questions earlier, it is my hope to get to the region once more, taking all advice that he would expect me to take. I want to reassure him that it has been important, of course, to communicate our advice to leave Lebanon, and if you are in the UK at this time, not to travel to Lebanon, and to convey that advice across all channels. And that is taking place. It's been taking place since last night, and it will be taking place over the coming days to communicate that very loudly in country as well. He will also note that we have begun the registration scheme that allows UK nationals to register their presence in Lebanon so that we know where they are, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, we keep the safety of our consular staff in close review, particularly with the dangers that exist with missiles being fired in this way on both sides. Our estimation is that about 16,000 UK nationals are in the region, but of course asking people to register does enable us to know who is there, and of course we urge people to leave on the many flights that are available currently, commercial flights from Lebanon, to leave and make their way to Europe and back home. And of course we are working with our international partners. He will note that the US, Germany and Canada all upping their travel advice along the lines that we first began yesterday.
Derek Twigg.
Madam Secretary, can I welcome the statement by the Foreign Secretary? In terms of Iran, can I ask the Foreign Secretary, and because he referred to it in his statement about countering Iranian threats, in his short time in office, has he made any assessment yet about how successful they have been?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that we are clear-eyed that Iran continues to destabilise the Middle East through its military, financial and political support for its proxies and partners, including Iranian-aligned militia groups in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah and Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, and we continue to work with international partners to encourage de-escalation and a long-term peace and security in the Middle East.
Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Fraud.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and his advice to British nationals, which seems like a very wise precaution and could potentially involve us not having to evacuate British citizens in the future. I join him in condemning the Hezbollah strike in the Golan Heights, which killed 12 Druze children, and our thoughts go out to their families. But now we find the region on the precipice that many of us have feared since the 7th of October last year, the escalation of the dire conflict to another front, with Israel's Minister Smotrich warning of an all-out war with Hezbollah. The UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process has urged maximum restraint and the immediate cessation of rocket fire across the Blue Line. We welcome that call and urge the UK government to work closely with regional powers to do whatever we can to de-escalate the situation. So my question to the Foreign Secretary is, has he and have his colleagues engaged with the UN Special Coordinator? And if not, will they do so, given the Special Coordinator's vital role in moments such as these? The Liberal Democrats welcome his call for an immediate bilateral ceasefire to end the humanitarian devastation in Gaza, to get the hostages home, and to open the door to a two-state solution. This is a deeply insecure region, and that insecurity is felt by everybody who lives there, by Israelis, by Palestinians, by everybody. A two-state solution will deliver the dignity and security that they need, and I'm reassured to hear the Foreign Secretary will be making those calls on regional powers when he next visits the region.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Lib Dem spokesman for the tone and manner of his remarks. Can I reassure him that I have been in touch with the UN Special Envoy, Amos Hochstein. I've spoken to him several times over the past. I intend to speak to him again over the coming days. And as I indicated, it is my hope to get to the region if the security situation allows. And he's absolutely right. An immediate ceasefire is what we need. We need those hostages out and we need the aid in. But on that point of an immediate ceasefire, if we get that ceasefire, if the Biden plan is adopted, then it allows us to see de-escalation across the region. That is why we need to see that plan adopted by both sides as soon as possible.
David Pincher, distinguished.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I take this opportunity to welcome you to the Chair. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement on Hezbollah's horrific attack and his condemnation of the awful strike in Majd al-Shams. What steps will the Foreign Secretary take to put maximum pressure on Hezbollah to cease its rocket attacks for good?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We've got a long-standing no-contact policy with Hezbollah. However, we of course continue to speak to the government in Lebanon as fragile as that government is. We condemn Hezbollah's destabilising activity, and we do obviously coordinate very closely with regional partners, some of whom are in contact with Hezbollah.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Welcoming the Right Honourable Gentleman to his place. He's not technically speaking a Right Honourable friend, but he's a personal friend of mine since my original attempt to stop him being elected in Tottenham many years ago. Thank him for his statement today, Madam Deputy Speaker. He knows well there are many moderate and measured voices in Lebanon and in the Lebanese diaspora too, and I'm glad that he's emphasised the close relationship between our government and our armed forces and the Lebanese army. Will he agree to meet a small group of people who have been associated with the all-party group, of which I've chaired? As you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, all-party groups are reforming as we speak. But there is a group of parliamentarians that have been part of that all-party group. It would be very useful for us to meet him to discuss what more can be done across the House to support the efforts he's described today.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, over my 24 years in this place, the strangest of friendships are struck up across party lines. And so, of course, I will meet with the honourable gentleman and the group, because this is a very serious issue, and I know that this is a cross-party issue that all members of this House will want to see de-escalated.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right friend's statement, and we must deplore the loss of civilian life, particularly children, on either side of the divide. So welcome his calls for de-escalation in Lebanon and for repeated calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. But looking ahead to the long-term peace, to a two-state solution, how does my right friend deal with the comments of the Israeli Prime Minister the other day, who said that Samaria and Judea are an integral part of Israel and they're not occupying the West Bank? In that situation, hasn't the government got to get on with recognising a Palestinian state rather than waiting for the Israelis to come round to the view it's acceptable to them?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my very good friend who has been championing these issues now for many, many years. And of course, this last period has been of huge concern to him and to his constituents. I was horrified by the degree of expansion that I saw in the West Bank a few weeks ago, more in the last year than we've seen in 20 years. The violence is unacceptable, and the tone and the rhetoric and the statements from some members of the government, I think, is very alarming indeed. And so, as he would expect, I did press these issues with both the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli President, and we keep the situation in the West Bank under close review.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for prior sight of his statement, and I share his deep concern as to where the region currently finds itself. He will not need reminding that in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas atrocity of October the 7th, the international community allowed Israel to blur those vitally important lines between legitimate self-defence and a lust for revenge. As a result, Israel has acted with impunity, and 40,000 civilians are dead, and Gaza has been reduced to rubble. So what discussions has he had with Israel and our international partners to ensure that, heaven forbid, should this conflict escalate further, that all those involved know and understand and accept that revenge and legitimate self-defence are not the same thing under international law, so we avoid in 9 months' time having another 40,000 civilian casualties?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, it was very important for me to visit the occupied territories and Israel within the first week in office. We said this in opposition, and we say this again in government. Of course, given the hostages that are still in Israel, Israel has a right to defend itself, but it is a qualified right. It has always been within international humanitarian law. And the scale of civilian loss of life, the children, the women who have lost their lives, the aid workers who have lost their lives, against a backdrop in which journalists are not allowed into the country, has been a matter of deep concern and worry across the international community. So, of course, I raised these issues. It was also important to meet with hostage families and to be absolutely clear, we want to see those hostages returned.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on your new appointment. I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that the escalation of violence can be reduced if we look at ending the suffering in Gaza. At a briefing I attended today with Oxfam and Medical Aid Palestine, they talked about how Israel were using water as a weapon of war. People have 4.7 litres of water per day to wash, clean and cook, and that is less than a toilet flush. So I welcome the position that we've taken. We've moved, greatly, but does my honourable friend agree with me that we need to go much further and much faster?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right. The issue of water, waterborne disease, we now have polio setting in, and of course we've had the famine because the lack of desalination is a very, very serious issue. That's why it was important to take the decision in the first days of office to restore aid to UNRWA, also to increase the amount of funds available to UK Med and to do more to open up field medical sites across Gaza. We will continue to press the aid issue in Gaza. I think it is important that the Rafah crossing is opened also, which would alleviate a lot of suffering.
Mike Tapp.
Speaker, and thank you to the Foreign Secretary for your calls for de-escalation and a ceasefire, which of course should include the release of all hostages to ensure that we get more humanitarian aid in and a two-state solution. But of course we need to also look at the flow of arms, training and finances from the Iranian regime to the terror proxies of Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis, who are working tirelessly to ensure there isn't peace in the region. Foreign Secretary, do you agree that we should be helping Israel as much as we can to defend itself from these groups and their attacks?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. When you look at the scale of rocket fire and missiles and the damage that they are doing, when you think about these poor people away from their homes in northern Israel and boarded up now in hotels for months and months and months, it is important to have in clear view who is supporting these proxies and the arms and the weaponry that is driving a lot of conflict in the region, including by Hamas, by the way. And so for all of those reasons, we do keep sanctions under review.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today. And obviously, yet more deaths is a tragedy. Every mother and every father grieves for lost children, as do all relatives. But there is an issue here that unless the government and Israel and others accept the ICJ opinions and judgments about the illegal nature of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and of course the illegal nature of the occupation of the Golan Heights, then we're in danger of the conflict getting much worse. The UN Secretary General has called for restraint. Will the British government join him in doing that, but also join him in trying to convene some sort of regional peace initiative in order to prevent this whole thing escalating completely out of control? And finally, does the government reject the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman who I know has taken up these issues over many years in this Parliament. Let me be clear that what I saw and what I continue to see in the occupied territories is unacceptable. He will know that the community who experienced this violence in the Golan Heights are Druze in background, and this is occupation of the Golan Heights as well. I do recognise that. I want to see de-escalation across the board. I want to see a solution along the lines of Oslo and 1967. That is what we all want to get to, a two-state solution. And we will achieve that if we have an immediate ceasefire and we get back to political dialogue and conversation.